This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10, and thank you for choosing LBC this morning. I have to, do you want a little bit of inside info? It's really boring. God, I'm selling that well, aren't I? Sometimes I feel the need to address a story that just popped up in the news bulletin and is not the subject that we're going to start with on air. And sometimes when I do that, it has no impact whatsoever on your decision to phone me or not. But some days it does. So I'm trying to work out what maybe if I go on for too long, which means I've made the worst imaginable start to the programme, or maybe I don't go on long enough, or I don't make it clear that so here's the thing, that story about Donald Trump suing the New York Times, it's important that we all understand exactly what is going on there. He has no prospect of winning. Absolutely no prospect of winning, any more than his other legal suits, his other actions against that very newspaper, not to mention other media organisations, had any prospect of success. You could file this under breaking news, free speech latest. Remember, free speech, Donald Trump and his key allies and members of his administration keep telling us, free speech in the United Kingdom is under parlous threat, but the President of the United States of America is suing the New York Times. The New York Times... Of course, the paper that published the birthday card that appears to be, although he denies it, continues to deny it, from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein, that was, at the very least, sleazy. The reason why he is taking a ludicrously high figure, $15 billion, is intimidation. He has no prospect of winning, but it means that people will think twice about printing stuff that is true. If you are worried about threats to free speech, these are the things you should be looking out for, okay? He is terrorising people in the Fourth Estate, members of the media, whose freedoms are protected by the American Constitution, and he is using legal and governmental heft and financial heft to frighten them. So a good employer will defend a journalist against this kind of intimidation and attack, but no one can do it indefinitely, you know? If it was us, if it was me being sued for $15 billion, if it was LBC being sued for $15 billion because we had told the truth about Donald Trump, then there would, I imagine, come a point where even the best bosses in the world would say, can you just rein it in? Or we're going to have to give you your sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap if you won't, or I'm terribly sorry, but you're going to become a sacrificial lamb upon the altar of the President of the United States of America. And the reason why I thought it was important to get this up and early is because of this lie, this nonsense about free speech that is gathering pace on this side of the Atlantic. The lies that are being told by allies or admirers of Donald Trump on this side of the Atlantic about your free speech, which is absolutely untrammeled and sacrosanct and supremely well protected. But the President is now suing journalists for telling the truth because he wants to make them, and this is such a crucial point, I don't know that it can be repeated often enough, he wants to make them frightened of telling the truth next time. Some of my, I got a memo this morning, some of the clips we've done recently, or some of the clips of the show recently, have had extraordinary success with American viewers, particularly on YouTube, listeners on YouTube. So you might need to hear this, guys, because I don't know how successful. I've seen one journalist has just been fired by her own newspaper for what strike me as supremely uncontroversial comments. But that's why he's doing it. He's doing it to frighten journalists, and crucially to frighten editors and to frighten owners even, because such is his power. He wants them to be frightened of telling the truth next time. And they might be. We all could be. Nobody, with like glorious exceptions whose names have gone down in history, often as martyrs, but hardly anybody is immune to that kind of external pressure and that kind of threat. And the attempts to silence people telling the truth are, throughout history, signs of epic and imminent danger. So keep an eye on that story, and do not underestimate how important it is when the allies of Donald Trump on this side of the Atlantic, including one whose latest examples of hypocrisy and doublespeak are off the flipping charts, and we will be examining a little bit later in the programme, when they try to tell you lies about free speech, remember, it's part of a process that is designed to silence people telling the truth. It's why the Charlie Kirk aftermath has been so extraordinary. A man whose name we barely knew last week is now the biggest story on this side of the Atlantic, and the element of the story that's gone enormous is the punishment and the sanction and the terrorization of people who have exercised their free speech, sometimes insensitively, sometimes very crassly, even cruelly. But they have exercised their free speech in the aftermath of his murder. That's extraordinary. And those are the people telling you, the people saying, he must be fired, she must be fired, he must be prosecuted, we must shut these people down. They're the ones telling you that free speech is under threat. You cannot exaggerate how transparent and how dangerous these moments are. And it's a good job he's not visiting Britain this week, isn't it? Because that would be a really scary development. Speaking of silencing people who are determined to tell the truth, we turn our attention next to the United Nations Commission of Inquiry that has found Israel has committed suicide against Palestinians in Gaza. I don't know. The calendar is fascinating, isn't it? Since that hideous attack of October the 7th, 2023. The calendar is fascinating. Ireland moved very quickly, and some other countries. By February the 14th of 2024, by Valentine's Day 2024, Ireland and other countries were describing Israel's offensives in the strongest possible terms. I think they may even have been using the word genocide by then. And some of us were very reluctant to do so. Some of us felt, and continue to feel, that it was perfectly reasonable for Israel to respond in the most severe of manners to that terrorist atrocity of October the 7th, in which about 1,200 people were killed and 251 taken hostage. There's a moment where the numbers become irresistible, isn't there? There's a moment where the horror and the heartbreak you feel at the killing of those 1,200 people has to in some way reflect or account for the feelings you have when I remind you that nearly 65,000 people have now been killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza, the majority of whom have been women and children. Nick had that unicorn caller today. I don't know if you heard it. Nick had that unicorn caller who is still claiming that Israel has done everything within its power to minimize civilian casualties. 65,000 dead. Impossible at the moment to identify precisely. I think I said, did I say suicide? I obviously meant genocide. Impossible at the moment to identify precisely what proportion of that is civilians, but it will be the massive, 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 massive percentage. And you've still got people claiming that Israel has done everything it can to minimise civilian casualties. So you're left with two conclusions. Suicide might turn out to have been a Freudian slip, actually. You're left with two conclusions. Either that is the biggest load of nonsense you've ever heard since the last time Benjamin Netanyahu opened his mouth on this subject, or the Israeli Defence Force is quite spectacularly incompetent. We have tried our very hardest to not to kill civilians, but we've killed tens of thousands of women and children. So tell me again how hard you've tried? Good grief. And again, it's only one caller to a radio station and possibly not someone who would ring me anymore, but to be still clinging to that no nonsense, that idea is, if the stakes if the death toll wasn't so high, it would be heartbreaking that anybody could remain so deluded. But of course, it is that delusion that has contributed to this death toll. And again, inevitably, the evidence that the United Nations Commission has considered, which cites heavily the comments made by Israeli leaders, is being described by an Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesperson as Hamas proxies and relying entirely on Hamas falsehoods laundered and repeated by others. Moments at which you realised where this was all going. Is that a phone-in, do you think? It's a bit too vague, isn't it? It's a bit too subtle. But I'll tell you one for me, and I'm not going to apologise for not spotting this even sooner. But when Israel started claiming that all of the information coming out of Gaza couldn't be trusted because Hamas were in charge of so much of the infrastructure, and simultaneously they wouldn't let independent journalists from organisations like this or the BBC or ITN or Channel 4 News into Gaza, you realise that there was a pretty obvious scam going on. You can't trust any of the information coming out of that area except the information we give you, and you're not allowed to send anyone in to check for themselves. So if you were to be marking the milestones of misery that have led to this conclusion of genocide, that would probably be a big one, right? Disproportionality would probably be a big one. It is absolutely right that Israel responds. Absolutely right. But there will come a point when it's disproportionate. And that point got passed a long time ago, but there will never be consensus on when. There'll never be unanimous agreement on when that point got passed. And that is among people who know that the point has been passed, never mind the people still clinging to the lie that it hasn't, to the nonsense that Israel has done everything in its power to minimise civilian casualties. And now it launches a ground offensive in Gaza, and nobody's even pretending anymore that this has anything to do with hostages, except, of course, the terminally deluded. And I mean, it's almost impossible in 2025, in an information-rich world, to get your head around the successful pincer movement of banning journalism and also claiming a monopoly on information coming out. So let's look at 4 of the things that have led the Commission to reach its conclusion that Israeli authorities and Israeli forces have committed 4 of the 5 acts of genocide defined under the 1948 Genocide Convention against a national, ethnic, racial or religious group, in this case Palestinians in Gaza. And remember, this follows a plurality of international genocide scholars not only arriving at the same conclusion, but also explaining and showing their working in extraordinary detail. Killing members of the group through attacks on protected objects, targeting civilians and other protected persons, the deliberate infliction of conditions causing deaths. It is inarguable that is what has happened. Whether through famine, whether through attacks on hospitals, whether through attacks upon people queuing for food, whatever it may be, it is absolutely inarguable that has happened. And therefore, the conclusion that an act of genocide has been committed was perhaps inevitable. Point 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group through direct attack on civilians and protected objects, severe mistreatment of detainees, forced displacement and environmental destruction. Another milestone, when they told people who'd already been displaced, whose homes had already been blown up and who were sheltering in tents in hideous conditions, that they had to move again. And you sort of think, what purpose does that possibly serve? Point 3, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group in whole or in part, through destruction of structures and land essential to Palestinians, destruction and denial of access to medical services, forced displacement, blocking essential aid, water, electricity and fuel from reaching Palestinians, reproductive violence, and specific conditions impacting children. Specific conditions impacting children. And on it goes, imposing measures intended to prevent births. This is crucial because when the wasteland that remains is repopulated, who is it going to be repopulated by? Through the December 2023 attack on Gaza's largest fertility clinic, where an estimated 4,000 embryos, 1,000 sperm samples and unfertilized eggs were destroyed. Did you even know that? To fulfill the legal definition of genocide under the Genocide Convention, it must also be established that the perpetrator committed any one of those acts with specific intent to destroy the group in whole or in part. And there you find that the actual words of President Isaac Herzog, who was here last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant have incited the commission of genocide. Genocidal intent, and I quote, was the only reasonable inference that could be concluded from the pattern of conduct of Israeli authorities and security forces in Gaza. And there are two responses. There are three responses to this. One is, may God have mercy on all their souls. But we've known this for some time. The second possible response is, good grief. I can't believe it's taken today for me to realise the full extent of what has gone on. And the third response is, lies, 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 lies. Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. Hamas propaganda, Hamas propaganda, Hamas propaganda. Close eyes, put fingers in ears, and try desperately never to think of the tens of thousands of dead children, the 64,905 people killed, of whom you can argue some deserve to die. But the mistake that they made, of course, was by allowing the idea to be articulated that they all deserve to die. And it's members of the Israeli administration that have done that. So despite managing to control everything, to silence dissent almost everywhere in the English-speaking world, to ban journalists, objective, honest journalists, from getting into the strip so that there could be actual, reliable reportage coming out. And don't even remind me to remind you how many journalists have been killed working for organisations like Al Jazeera and others who had people on the ground already, managing to shut down communication, shut down aid, shut down dissent, shut down discourse, shut down honest reporting, shut down anybody really minded to tell the truth about what has been going on. And crucially, they couldn't even hold that line without letting the words that demonstrate genocidal intent slip out to the delight of the baying supporters. And there we are. There we are. 4 out of 5 criteria for genocide reached, breached, and broken by Israel. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group, and in some ways, despite the fact that this is potential life rather than life, but imposing measures intended to prevent births is the most dystopian of all, isn't it? Important to get all the details out there. Also important, given the reason why we spend time together every morning, to actually turn it into a question that can be answered by people phoning the programme. And I haven't done that yet, and it's already nearly 20 past, so bear with me. But I think the question is this. What has Benjamin Netanyahu... And listen, I will remind you of how many journalists have been killed, how many aid workers, how many children, how many babies, how many doctors. But And don't think for a moment that the key figure here, the key statistic, the key demographic is the dead. But I do want to talk about what Benjamin Netanyahu has done to Israel. What has he done to Israel? He's turned Israel into a genocidal state, as adjudged by pretty much or one of the most august international bodies charged with policing that word, charged with establishing that criteria. I saw the well, that's the question, and it may turn out that I've got a lot more to say to you, but goodness knows this is a subject that I'm so proud, actually, of how we've managed to conduct ourselves in this space since that horrible day in 2023. I'm so grateful to you for holding my hand as we've tried to walk a tightrope of accusation and abuse on one hand, and of gratitude and accusation and abuse from both, quote, sides. Don't make any mistake about that. People furious about how I described the Hamas attack in the first place and the necessity of Israel's robust response, and then people slowly getting more furious about my critique of the increasing hideousness of Israel's robust response. But I've been doing this job a long time now, and I've learnt to trust you, and I've learnt who to trust. And we've got this absolutely right. The only criticism I'd accept is that we might have been a little bit late going to the word genocide. But I would stand by that today as well, actually, because you need to have the support of a plurality of international scholars and now the United Nations Commission of Inquiry. And yes, there will be people calling me anti-Semitic. They can never call me a liar, but they can call me anti-Semitic, and that's fine. I can live with that. And that is the delusion. That is all that's left now, is that it can't be genocide because I say so. I don't know what Netanyahu's done to them, It's horrible to witness, including members of the UK media. Absolutely horrible to witness people who were not like this 5 years ago or even 3 years ago now becoming genocide apologists in public on the payroll of some of the major media organisations in this country. But the bigger picture, what has Benjamin Netanyahu done to Israel? We know what he's done to Gaza. It's called genocide. So that's not a phone-in anymore. What's he done to Israel? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10. And I do have a little bit more to say, but I want you to book your place early. The question is quite straightforward, but the answer will be anything but. What has Benjamin Netanyahu done to Israel? The United Nations Commission of Inquiry has told us today that what it has done to Gaza is genocide, a conclusion that many, many, many people, particularly people with a proper understanding of international law, reached some time ago. But I, for the avoidance of doubt, as someone who both believes in and understands the necessity of the modern state of Israel to the Jewish experience, to the Jewish diaspora, let alone to the Jewish population in Israel, I worry. I worry on a hideous level about what he has done to the country, what he has done to the status, the reputation, the future of that nation. And I want you to tell me, what do you think he's done? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I saw, and this may sound like a non sequitur, but it's the way my brain works. I saw The Producers last night, the Mel Brooks musical at the Garrick Theatre in London. It's a magnificent production. And it is, I mean, absolutely loaded with what I think you could fairly describe as Jewish humour. Nobody else really could have written a musical mocking Hitler and mocking the Holocaust and even turning the swastika into a symbol of fun. You'd need to be a Jewish artist to do that. And it was extraordinary watching it and thinking about what was happening in the Middle East now, reflecting on what would the equivalent be. I have absolutely no idea. But the bittersweet nature of some of my laughter at that extraordinary production and that quite beautiful piece of art was something that I really wasn't expecting when I went there. It's an old play, updated a bit, but essentially still very much a kind of a creature of its own age. But that question of what has Netanyahu done? What has he done to people who would never previously have questioned their support for anything that Israel did, but cannot possibly countenance this? What has he done? What has he broken when it comes to the honest people who are capable of objectivity, even if it's a very long slog to get there? But I can defend this and I can defend that, and I recognise the necessity of this, but I can't defend a genocide. I'm left with two choices. I'm speaking as somebody else now, not as myself. I'm imagining what's going on in the mind of others. I've got two choices. I can either call everybody else a liar, like literally everybody else is a liar, or I can reflect and recalibrate. And Benjamin Netanyahu has done that to the world, let alone to Israel itself and to the Jewish people. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. We know what Israel, or what Netanyahu has done to Gaza. What has he done? What have the leaders whose very statements have now been cited as evidence of genocidal intent? Let me say that again. Their very statements have been cited as evidence of genocidal intent. What have they done to Israel's future, Israel's status, Israel's reputation, and Israel's role in the world? I don't want to squeeze anybody in the 1 minute remaining, which means we're going to have one of those record-breaking mornings when I've taken you all the way up to the 10:30 news without taking a call. But that's a mark of how important this is and how essential it is to get everything out there, everything lined up and everything Everything established. Deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the group and prevent births. Those 4 things. Other people may still do phone-ins about whether or not this is fair, whether or not this is a genocide, and they're entitled to, although it strikes me as a little bit ridiculous. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group, and imposing measures intended to prevent births. Tick, 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 tick. That's what he's done to the Palestinian people. What has he done to the Israeli people? 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:32. Words, of course, are important, never more so than when you're discussing an issue like this. And it is a United Nations Commission conclusion, not accusation, but conclusion, that 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined under international law have been carried out since the start of the war with Hamas in 2023. I suppose there's a 4th position, isn't there? I mentioned that there were 3, that you are utterly unsurprised by this and even perhaps distressed by how long it has taken. Number 2, that you hadn't fully appreciated the scale of what Israel has done in Gaza, but thanks to the United Nations, you do now. Number 3, you're still in complete denial, shouting anti-Semitism at anybody pointing out these stories or anybody citing these statistics and claiming that Israel has done everything it can to protect civilian lives, even as 65,000 people lie in makeshift graves. And, of course, the 4th one is that, I don't know, people are prepared to say this out loud. Yes, it is a genocide, and it was justified. I guess that is a reasonable position that I should have spotted as well. It is a genocide, but it's absolutely justified because of the existential threat under which Israel exists. 10:33 is the time. Let's get some phone calls on the programme. If you've tuned in for the first time today, it is a phone-in show, although you could be forgiven for not having noticed that yet. And I should also tell you that Noga Tarnopolsky, who's been a wonderful guide through much of these issues and events, will be joining me in about 12 minutes' time, so we may well continue this conversation into the second hour. Muna is in Kilburn. Muna, what would you like to say?
Hi, I would just want to say, first of all, I'm a long-time listener. I've listened while I lived in the US, and I'm listening now while I've moved back to England,
Fantastic.
London, Kilburn.
Thank you.
I think your question is a very interesting one, and I think that actually creates another question in my mind, so I'm interested to hear what you think. But what Netanyahu has done to Israel is it's made it complicit in a genocidal country. It's not the first time that this has happened. Other countries, our country, there's countries right now complicit in their own genocides of their people, for example, Sudan. And that's just a matter of fact right now, at least for me, and obviously what the commissioner just said. So I think what Israel people need to do now is decide if they want to continue being complicit in this genocide. And if they do, then this is what their legacy is going to be. Other countries have come back from this, what's happened in Egypt. There are an opportunity here for Israel to come back. I think the interesting thing is if they're going to. But what Netanyahu has also done in the same time is made other countries complicit in this by, for example, us, by funding this genocide in America, by funding this genocide. And I think that's the question that I kind of wanted to pose to you.
In a sentence, what was it again? Forgive me.
No worries. Not only
hang on a minute, for everybody else's benefit, I don't want to be the one answering the questions today. I've just done a 30-minute monologue setting out my thoughts and opinions. So, respectfully, I think people have heard quite enough from me. But you're here now. So, what was the question in a sentence?
Not just to what Netanyahu has done to Israel, but what has Netanyahu done to other countries too.
Yeah, I think, again, respectfully, I'll pause on that one until we've actually got a little bit more flesh on the bones of answers to the question that we're asking today. So your answer to that question is that, listen, the United Nations hasn't found that the Israeli government has committed genocide. It's found that Israel has committed genocide. So you're absolutely right. The first answer to the question is very simply that the country is now complicit. Everybody in the country is now complicit. And, you know, it's a state-sanctioned genocide, so that there are distinctions to be drawn between, if you like, civil wars, where you can't talk about what the government is because there's an alternative government on the other side of the battlefield. This is a population that has been rendered complicit in genocide by its leaders. And for the people who say, no, we haven't, what of them?
No, we haven't completed.
Yeah, no, we're not complicit in genocide because it's not a genocide, and we refuse to accept any criteria, any judgment, any international law, any reading of the world under which we are genocidal. Because that's the alternative. Israel could double down on that now.
Exactly, but I can also say pigs fly. It doesn't make it necessarily true. And I think this is why we as a country then need to decide if we want to be also continue to be complicit to that, correct? Where we stand. And I think that's where
I'm sure it's me not paying attention. And I'm always very conscious when I've taken so long to introduce a subject that we want to hear people answering the question as quickly as we possibly can. So what has Netanyahu done to Israel? Louise is in Billericay. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you for taking my call.
Most welcome.
I'm devastated, James. I lived in Israel many years ago, and I have many friends in Israel. And before anybody accuses me of being anti-Semitic, I actually went and volunteered in Israel and worked for their ambulance service, literally risking my life. So
I wonder whether it's time for us to actually start shrugging off the people accusing us of anti-Semitism when we're having conversations about an adjudged genocide. It just seems almost as if it pollutes the discourse now, because we should be focusing upon the dead. And we should be focusing upon what Benjamin Netanyahu has done to his own country and not worrying about In fact, I'll read you a quick text. Here you go. Just to prove my point, because this is... I'm okay being anti-Semitic, says James O'Brien. No truer words have ever been spoken. When, of course, what I actually said is I'm okay with being accused of anti-Semitism by liars and genocide apologists. So I think we can just leave it at that now, can't we?
Yeah, well, I think that's... I've got three answers to your question, yes. James, and one of those is that you just led me into. It wasn't the order, but I'll do it. He's weaponized anti-Semitism. When you say, what has he done to Israel? Israel and Netanyahu are two different things, yes. And we are living in a weird time in our world where democracy, I think, is failing the majority, because what we have are countries around the world, like Israel, like America, where it is not the vast majority of people that they speak for or they act for, you know. And I have friends in Israel who are and have been for months feeling... Do you remember how we felt, James, when Johnson was in full rampage and we were completely powerless?
Yes.
That's what people are saying to me they feel like in Israel, the decent people. But what I shouldn't say decent people. The other point I want to make, having lived there, is we're dealing with people with generational trauma, James. And when you live there, it's very different to living here. You'll get on a bus and something will stick in your back and you'll turn around and it's an 18-year-old with a machine gun slung over their shoulder. Mm. It's a weird environment to live in, perpetually in fear. And I think Netanyahu harnessed that at the beginning. And obviously, it goes without saying how horrendous October the 7th was, right?
Yes, of course.
But what he's done is he has, first of all, he has played into making anti-Semitism a far greater force in our world. And that is why I'm devastated.
You mean he's increased it because of people who are unable or unwilling to distinguish between Israel and Jewish?
Yes.
Yes.
And between the state of Israel
well, can
and
we
the
blame? I mean, I think you're right. I think it's obvious that feeling is abroad and growing. But is it Netanyahu's fault? Because that's a failure on the part of the person harbouring that feeling. You can't hate Jews because of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. You can't hate Jews because of what Israel is doing. And if you say Netanyahu has made it easier to make that conflation, aren't you letting the bigots who hold that view off the hook?
I don't think so. I completely take your point, James, but I guess what I'm saying is that in his actions and in the condemnation of the world, it's an empowerment of people who hold those feelings to feel justified to say them.
God.
So yes, it is a failing on their part, but do you remember after Brexit, when that poor Polish person was beaten so badly in the street the day after the referendum, James?
I think I do. I mean, there were a few stories like that at the time, but we can certainly say that many people were targeted as a consequence of their foreignness.
And that's exactly sort of an example of what I'm talking about. If you have hate in your heart, or if you have fear that causes hate, and if somebody, your whole show exists because so few people manage critical thinking anymore, James, and the fact that there are more than one thing can be true, right? Because you spend every day
saying exactly that.
Against that.
I hope so.
Yes. You do, and you do it magnificently, and you are my soul crush because my soul is grateful for you on a daily basis. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, so what we have is can I just tell you one thing very quickly? I know you've got lots of calls.
Go on.
But the reason I went to Israel was 40 years ago when I was a teenager. I was obsessed with Nazi Germany, World War II, The Final Solution, and I did a whole load of reading. And I remember reading it, James, and thinking, thank God we've moved on from those times.
Yes.
What people will do to people, and Netanyahu is making Israel less safe, James. I worked on the ambulances there. I went to terrorist attacks on a weekly basis. That is still to come once the dust settles.
Well, we have to. We all have to hope not. And this is not in any way a contradiction of anything you've said. I'd still much rather live in Israel than live in Gaza. But yes, I mean, internationally, nationally, domestically, politically, in security terms, then you have to acknowledge the fact that he has ramped up opposition, both rational and irrational. So the conflation of a Jewish identity with support for genocide is an irrational position, which has been increased in recent years and months, but also the rational disgust at a state, a government and a people, sadly, because the Commission has found that Israel has committed genocide. It is a democratically elected government that has undertaken this path. And that, of course, creates huge problems for whether you want to call them defenders or apologists or I don't know what other words fit the space now. I also find myself thinking today about people who were using the word genocide a very long time ago and whether or not you recognise that the official record has to wait for organisations like the United Nations Commission of Inquiry or international bodies of genocidal scholars. But I don't want you to feel excluded from this conversation. I don't want you to feel that you were excluded from any conversations. You weren't. I've been very sensitive about that word in the context of these discussions, but I haven't been shy of it. There's a crucial difference, and I certainly haven't been shy of you using it. Qualification sometimes, on many people would disagree with that, and David Lammy wrote a letter recently saying that the UK government hasn't reached this conclusion that the United Nations Commission has reached, although if you read into that, you'll realise that is partly because of the role that our arms industry still plays, and that if he were to acknowledge genocide, then the United Kingdom would essentially be owning up to complicity in it. So, as is often the case, some of this stuff is a lot simpler than it looks, and some of it is even more complicated. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where, as is, I suppose, the luxury of distance, the focus upon the United Nations Commission concluding that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza has been concerning us. But, of course, in that part of the world, there is another offensive underway. Israel has launched a ground offensive in Gaza City. This follows weeks of intense bombardments. It's the territory's largest urban centre, or at least what is left of it, and there's rather less left of it now than there was earlier today, with entire apartment blocks being reduced to rubble and many Palestinian people being forced to flee despite, and again, this isn't an opinion, this is a statement of fact, there being nowhere safe to flee to. Noga Tarnopolsky is a freelance journalist based in Jerusalem who has been of enormous help to us throughout this horrible period of history, and who joins me now. And it is to Gaza City that we should turn first, I think, Noga. And the question of why Benjamin Netanyahu continues to pursue this course and what, in either military or political terms, it is designed to achieve.
Well, James, I think that the first reason we have to give for this, even before political or military possibilities, is simply the fact that the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio was here yesterday, stood right beside Prime Minister Netanyahu, and basically gave this operation the go-ahead. I think that without an affirmative okay from the United States, that this wouldn't be happening. So just, even practically, this is reason number one. But Prime Minister Netanyahu declared his intention to launch this new Gaza offensive now several weeks ago. He has all along seemed absolutely determined to do it. And, he himself does not describe clear military aims. What he says the aim is to get the Israeli hostages back and to completely and totally destroy Hamas. How the first can be achieved when the same hostages are also now being bombed is very difficult to understand. Important also to state, just in real life terms, that we know for a fact that way too many Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza were killed in Israeli bombardments. And we don't know of any cases of Israelis who were rescued during this kind of military maneuver. So that part of the Prime Minister's statement remains questionable. And the second part, to destroy Hamas, I have to say is also questionable, because the Israeli military opposed this operation to the extent that there were screaming matches between the IDF chief of staff meeting with Netanyahu's cabinet, demanding that they move towards an accord, some kind of ceasefire agreement which would get the hostages out, and the ministers berating him, including recent reports say Prime Minister Netanyahu's right-hand man, the Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, who is the man charged with bringing these hostages home. Since he got the job, he has brought exactly 0 hostages home. And he is quoted screaming at the IDF chief of staff, "You don't know anything about diplomacy." So Israel is in a very febrile state right now. And I think it's fair to say that a majority of Israelis fear that this is a political maneuver for the prime minister and not a necessary military maneuver.
Because of what you've so clearly articulated, the near impossibility of rationalising a claim that this is designed to either rescue hostages, who you are, of course, bombarding, or destroy Hamas, which, I mean, if it were achievable, it would probably have been achieved months ago.
Yes, or a year ago. Yeah. I mean, even Israel launched a strike in Doha last week that we were told, was aimed at decapitating Hamas's foreign leadership, right? The Hamas's leaders ensconced in the Qatari capital. So in terms of its stated aim, this strike failed. Prime Minister Netanyahu claims it didn't fail at all because he now changed the intention, and he said it was aimed at delivering a message. And so it's just, I'm giving you, this is another example of the goalposts constantly being shifted, especially from Prime Minister Netanyahu to his own people. By the way, I should share with you, right now, here in Jerusalem, not far from me, there are 2 growing protests, even under this burning sun. Family members of the hostages and many people who sympathize with them started spontaneously gathering outside the Prime Minister's home last night around midnight, when it became clear that this offensive was being launched, even if it hadn't been declared. And they basically spent the night in sleeping bags and now say they won't leave until this is over. They're making heartbreaking, truly shattering statements there about their fears for their loved ones who are now under bombardment by their own army. The other protest is downtown Jerusalem. It's a more political protest against Prime Minister Netanyahu and his party, a very kind of raucous, mocking protest. I don't know how the day will progress, but that's where we are now at about midday.
If all things being equal, if Netanyahu was ever going to be swayed or even toppled by public protest, again, that's something else that probably would have happened already. So I think not for the first time, Noga. I wonder, and you may not be able to answer this question, how does it end? How does this end? We can run through options if you want, rather than a single opinion.
I don't know is the absolute truth. I can lay out a few options. None of them are good. One option is a kind of deus ex machina, that something so catastrophic happens that even Netanyahu's remaining supporters in parliament turn on him. Last night, we had a little hint of how something like that might happen. The Prime Minister delivered an almost incomprehensibly ill-advised speech in which he warned Israelis that they should prepare for diplomatic and economic isolation, economic autarky, and that they should gird themselves to become, I'm quoting, a super Sparta. This has caused the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange to crash, and economic
just for people who possibly don't have the classics to understand this point, this is the actual Prime Minister of Israel,
who fancies himself a historian, James.
Yes, that's also a good point. But welcoming weapons-grade international pariah status.
That's right. And, when I heard this, I was stunned, and I thought, and I still think, that it's an indication of how isolated and disconnected he is from his own people. This caused complete panic in Israel. And it was exactly the wrong thing for him to be saying as this assault was being launched. But I do want to quote an esteemed colleague of mine here and even more longtime Netanyahu watcher than I, the journalist Shlomi Eldar. He thinks Netanyahu was very intentional in his words, and that he is girding Israelis for austerity, for suffering, and for declaring emergency regulations that would allow Netanyahu to cancel or postpone the next elections.
Wow.
So I think, I've laid before you two possibilities.
Yeah, neither
is good. The third one is that the protest could swell from something large but sporadic as it is right now. It's daily, but it's several thousand people normally, maybe 100,000 people on Saturday nights. But if it becomes 1.5 million people on the streets, I think that could have a different impact as well.
Thank you. I mean, as you say, none of them necessarily devoutly to be desired, but some preferable to others. Just to understand the super Sparta point, which I should have made earlier, actually, because we've been talking on the show today about what Netanyahu has done to Israel in the context of what the United Nations has concluded that he's done to Gaza. But that would involve carrying on the current course. I mean, there's not an awful lot left to raise to the ground or to blow up, but to continue on that course, even as the international community responds ever more robustly, whether with genocide findings or with sanctions or with withdrawal of trade or with any of the weapons that remain in the arsenal, the diplomatic and trade commercial arsenals. And as that happens, Israel and Israel alone suffers more and more and more and more, and he'll try to turn that in a kind of almost in a kind of a masochistic way. He'll try to turn that suffering into political strength. So the more Israel suffers, the stronger Netanyahu becomes. Could that be his reasoning?
I think very much so. And it's interesting to hear you spin out the theory. You almost are repeating verbatim a column that I published in a British magazine this week, detailing my thoughts on this subject. I think that Netanyahu, who, remember, argued for more than a decade that Israel's raison d'etre, or at least his, was to prevent forever the establishment of a Palestinian state. And he holds that up as a sort of a shield. And one of the catastrophic ways he achieved that for now is by funding and supporting Hamas. In fact, he said to his own political faction, the Likud party faction years ago now, anyone who wants to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state has to see Hamas as an asset. And so I think that for Netanyahu, the calls to establish a Palestinian state, the diplomatic threats and the diplomatic pariah status that Israel's now facing basically are pushing him deeper and deeper into a corner where if he gives an inch, basically he's showing that the emperor is naked.
It's
that
all
his
over.
Theory,
it's
yes.
all over.
Yes, I think the matter is existential for him. And the state of Israel and everything else be damned, including we now know the Israeli economy.
You're describing a bunker mentality, aren't you? The idea that nothing beyond his immediate purview matters at all, or even registers with him. Could he have gone? Could he have gone a bit mad?
Possibly. Today he's in court again. He's on trial for corruption. He showed up in court really almost like, an angry emir saying that he shouldn't have been forced to, shouldn't be forced to be in court, that this is a disgrace, that he's busy running a war. Testified for a little while and then got some note from his lawyers and announced to the judges very imperiously that he had to leave. I mean, there's a big debate among Netanyahu watchers in Israel. Has he gone around the bend a bit?
Yeah.
Or has he always been this man and we didn't notice it, and that he used the structures of Israeli democracy as long as it served him? I haven't come down on either side in this debate. I don't know.
What magazine were you writing in? Because I can tell you many of my listeners can't get enough of Noga Tarnopolsky, so they'd be delighted to read your thoughts.
That's very kind. It's the Institute of War and Peace Reporting. I'll send you the link.
I look forward to it. Noga, and thank you. I don't know that we could have got through this with the confidence in our own objectivity that we've managed to without your help, Noga. So thank you as well.
Thank you.
Even though, as you have just attested, things are far from over. That Super Sparta line, I apologise. I actually saw that last night and I registered what it meant, because I have got the Greek, as Peter Cook might have said. But that is really objectively terrifying. And what I've tried to do in this hour is explain why it would be terrifying for everybody, including, if not especially, Israelis. It is 1 minute after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes after 11 is the time. The Israeli president, whose statements form some of the evidence leading to the conclusion that Israel has committed genocide, has, spoiler alert, categorically rejected the United Nations report. So you are not really, as a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, allowed to accept any testimony, evidence, conclusion, explanation, journalism, statistics or facts from anyone except Benjamin Netanyahu, who, as Noga just reminded us a moment ago, has compared the future of his own country to a super Sparta. Let me be absolutely clear about what that is, because in the context of the question I've been asking you all morning, this is actually a really important development. In fact, to my modest embarrassment, I think, oh no, it can't have been, because I didn't know that the United Nations were going to come out with this conclusion today, but subconsciously I must have had the Super Sparta comment in the back of my mind when I found myself wondering earlier today what Netanyahu has done to Israel. And we can continue with that question for a little longer. Simon Marks joining us at past to have a look at the incredible clampings down on freedom of speech in the United States of America in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's murder. Some really dark stuff happening there, and it's been done by the people who are claiming that the threat to freedom of speech is coming from somewhere else. Extraordinary piece in the Telegraph today, which I told you was going to happen, actually, yesterday, where one journalist manages to take the appalling comments of Bob Villan to 1,500 concert goers in the Netherlands as evidence of behaviour of what she chooses to call the left. I told you that would happen. I literally told you yesterday. You find some really, really stupid and unpleasant comments, disgusting comments from about hunting people down in the street, or words to that effect. Obviously obnoxious, obviously offensive, but casting around so desperately for proof that the left is somehow subscribing to hideous worldviews. All you can find is one musical artiste on one stage in front of 1,500 people in the Netherlands a couple of nights ago, and yet that's proof that the left is embarked upon some hideous course. And not a word in that article by Suzanne Moore in The Telegraph about what is happening to people exercising free speech or indeed exercising dissent in the United States of America, and growing fears that Donald Trump is going to use the aftermath of that contemptible murder, the motivation for which remains completely unknown, that he's going to use it to criminalise dissent in the United States. Dissent, like literally criticism, disagreement, which of course brings us back to where the show started, and that's why he's suing the New York Times, because he's terrified of the truth. All autocrats are. All people like Donald Trump are terrified of the truth. And you can't necessarily criminalise the truth on day one, but you can certainly frighten the people telling the truth into silence. 8 minutes after 11 is the time, which is arguably something that Benjamin Netanyahu has successfully done, which is why many people wait, perhaps, until an intervention like the one today from the United Nations to feel more comfortable using the word genocide, even though it's a word that perhaps fits their interpretation of what has been going on in Gaza and has fitted it for some time. 9 minutes after 11. And we return to that question with, on the horizon, a little more detail on what precisely is meant by that phrase super Sparta, and actual, if you like, factual reference to what Benjamin Netanyahu himself thinks that Benjamin Netanyahu has done to Israel and what is likely to happen. Let's go to Manchester next. Renee is there. Renee, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello, Renee.
Great programme, great channel, great radio station. Thank you. I am a British Jew. My father was a Holocaust survivor. I'll be honest with you, thank God he's not alive now, because he would turn over in his grave to see what's happening in Gaza. Haven't we suffered enough as Jews to see what happened after the end of the Holocaust? Israel became a country, a nation, and they helped people. If there was disaster, Israel was the first to go out. And now we have a big wave of anti-Semitism. It was always there in the background, but it's come to the forum. I have a sister living in America. By marriage, my brother-in-law's uncle lives in Israel.
Right.
He's been there 53 years. He was a university lecturer, and now he's nearly 100, and he says to my sister, I wish I could leave. The country is so divided. Obviously, economically, it's down the pan, excuse the expression.
That's a perfectly reasonable expression, Renee. You really don't have to excuse it.
And also, when Hamas went to in October, they murdered people in the kibbutz.
Yes.
He said Israelis did not have enough security. He was more concerned, Netanyahu, about the settlers, right? That is wrong too. Two wrongs don't make a right. You will never get rid of Hamas. You get rid of 6, 12 come along. What they should have done, Israel, is said to the Palestinians, right, Hamas has done this. I want you to find these people, tell them where they are, and we will get rid of them. The people are scared of Hamas. If you talk wrongly about Hamas and you're Palestinian, they will go and kill you because they want everybody on their side. I absolutely think this is the most terrible thing to see these poor children starving. I'm sorry to be honest, it reminds me when they liberated Belsen, Auschwitz and everything else. It will all stay in me. I have a thing called a Holocaust gene. I feel for people. I help people where I can because my father said for him to survive, people helped him, and they've got to stop this. Israel had a most fantastic, should we say, a fantastic thought of it in
standing.
Yes, standing, right?
Yes.
And they would help people. Their technology is second to none, whether you like it or not. Even England, a lot of the, should we say, English Jews came over from Russia, and they came to England and they started businesses, they employed people. I mean, you've got fantastic people. You've got people like Don Black, our lyricist. He is Jewish, right? You've got people like Sir Alan Sugar. Yeah. He is Jewish. They built up this country and they were proud to be, English but Jewish. And now I'm so embarrassed. I am embarrassed, and I'm ashamed that Israel has become like this. And that Netanyahu, really, he's corrupt, he's power mad, and quite honestly, he's not the Israel that I went to 40 years ago, because unfortunately I've been very ill. I could not travel.
I'm sorry.
But he is absolutely the pits. The average person wants peace. And I'm sorry to be honest, I don't think any of the hostages are still alive. I'm sorry to be honest. It breaks my heart.
Well, I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong, obviously.
I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong.
But I suppose if they are, then they're less likely to be so by this time tomorrow, given what's happening in Gaza City at the moment, as we speak.
I mean, what's the point? What are they going to achieve?
Well, I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you
They're
that.
going to achieve nothing. These poor soldiers, they don't want to fight. Young soldiers have died. Their poor parents. Haven't we suffered enough? My father, just go back to think, my father was in a ghetto. I don't know if you've heard of ghetto.
Yes, of
in
course.
Poland.
Yes.
And before they liquidated it, the partisans cut the wires and said, anybody young or strong, come to the forest. And my father and his brother were young, 15 and 17, became I call them forest boys. They survived in the forest with the help of people like gypsies, which in Yiddish and in German it's called Zigeuner, and they helped each other, and other people helped them. They warned them. And my father survived. His brother didn't survive, but my father survived that. And people helped them, and it was something else. I mean, there's a film you have to see with Daniel Craig. I forgot the name. It's called Defiance, right?
Yes.
And that is the real Jews who came from nothing. I mean, you know, it's something. I watched that film and the tears were down my eyes because that was my father. And he's always said, always help people. If you can't help them, walk away. And this is not the Israel. I'm sorry, James. I'm not being funny, but this new wave of anti-Semitism has become very, excuse my language, trendy, right? It's become trendy. It has. I mean, I
had an earlier caller as well. I don't know if you heard. I don't like to let the people indulging in anti-Semitism off the hook by saying that Netanyahu has caused it, but the truth lies somewhere, and for you, clearly, it lies somewhere between those two positions. It's very because Netanyahu has conflated Judaism with Israel. Netanyahu has said that anybody criticising Israel is anti-Semitic. Therefore, the coin has two sides, doesn't it? And anti-Semitism is going to rise as a consequence of Netanyahu saying that they're the same thing. Criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. It's a horrible thing to witness. Can I ask you a question? Two things, actually. Stop apologising, Renee. You've got absolutely you've got nothing to apologise for, and an awful lot of love for you coming in to my switchboard. I mean, an awful lot of love. But I puzzle over one thing that you perhaps are much better qualified than me to answer. Your position would be relatively rare. I mean, the strength of your position and the strength of your convictions would be relatively rare, not unique, and certainly, not confined to your experiences among British Jews or among British supporters of Israel. And of course, they're not exactly the same thing. Why do you think that is? Why do you think, you can't speak for other people, but why do you think you're able to achieve the kind of clarity that many people still supporting Netanyahu or still buying into his propaganda have failed to achieve?
Because I feel something so different in my heart. You see, my father was, as I said, a Holocaust survivor.
Yes.
I have his genes. There's something in my DNA that makes me feel I've got compassion for people. I can help people where I can. You've got to stop all this. We're so divided, but really we should be all together. What are we achieving? Absolutely nothing. And I speak from my heart that I am so upset that people have fallen out. I mean, there was a gentleman one day, he was gay, Jewish and blind. He said one of his friends refused to talk to him because of Israel. I mean, come on, honey. This is the wrong way of doing it. I mean, get everybody together, talk together, I know it's a dull thing to say.
It's not a dull thing to say.
It's like you get people together, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. Right, we all like food. I think food brings people together, right?
Yes.
If you get people together, they like certain foods, Jewish people might like this, some people might like that. I have a lot of non-Jewish friends who love Jewish food. For example, they never, your chicken soup is the Jewish penicillin, and how do you make this, Renee, and that. But they're nice, they understand. But a lot of people don't understand. And I think, they've got to be told Israel has gone the wrong way. And I don't know how you're going to stop it, because you've got to get rid of him and let the people literally take over and start again. I mean, a lot of the Palestinians, they don't want all this. They don't want Hamas either. They don't want all these fanatics. They're fanatics.
Clearly.
When they finish with us, they'll start on somebody else. And people got to realise this. They are fanatics. I mean, quite honestly, what is Will's going to say, whether it's the UN? They don't, Israel, he doesn't care what the UN says. So we've got some excuse. We have done wrong. We went in the wrong way of doing things, and now we are suffering. And unfortunately, it's the truth. People do not like the truth. They run away from the truth. And I think, James, we're going to have more anti-Semitism. I mean, look at the attacks on Jewish people. Yeah. It's been worse in Germany, other countries. People used to get on well together. Now they're divided. What do I say? I just feel so. I feel so disenfranchised. I feel so upset. I want to say to them, stop it, what you're doing. I mean, he's quite honestly, you're never going to get rid of him. He's a power mad. He's corrupt. These Jewish settlers, what are they doing on there? Well, instead of 2 settlers, now they've got hundreds. We don't want it. It makes things even worse. It's fuel to the fire. Do you know what I mean, James?
Of course I know what you mean. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go on.
Are you sure you're not a professional orator?
No, look, my love, I'm not an orator.
You are.
I'm just a human being who has got feelings, who has been through a lot in her life, understands things. My father and I always talked about the Holocaust and people that helped him and how he survived and what happened afterwards. He was a very...
May I say something about your father?
Very brave man.
May I say something about him? Yeah. Can I just say that you honour his memory?
Oh, thank you so much, James.
Oh, thank you.
I do, because these people are fantastic. You hear stories of how there was a woman in France. She was in the middle of nowhere, and she hid Jewish children. She didn't even tell anybody, but her daughter, when she died, went into the loft and found her diaries. She never told a soul.
I had a friend who was hidden. Renee, in Lviv. A woman called Lily Pullman, who I met just like I've met you, because she rang into this programme and we lost her during the Holocaust, but during the lockdown, but she survived the Holocaust and dedicated her life to, and I'm going to say this even if I get a bit emotional, she dedicated her life to precisely the message that you have just shared on this programme. Yeah. Exactly the same message, and it is doable, and we have to hold on to the idea that it's achievable, especially when it feels like it isn't.
Can I just say one thing more? I think our new king and Camilla, they are fantastic. Whether you like, I was always like pro-royal, but they are fantastic. They had portraits taken of Holocaust survivors, and as you go into Buckingham Palace, they are on the wall. His very good friend was the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Dr. Jonathan Sachs, and he liked him. It was like a mentor to him when he was younger, because, as you probably realise, he didn't get on with his father very well, but he used to go to Jonathan Sachs and talk to him, not always about religion, just about life.
And he wanted, of course, to be defender of all the faiths when he was a younger man. He recognised the importance of diversity and plurality.
Yeah, he was brilliant.
Are you sure you haven't got a podcast?
No, I would love to have a podcast. I don't even know what it is. I'm not very. I've only recently got an iPhone.
Well,
do you want to
lovely.
hear something, James? I've only recently got an iPhone because I'm very old-fashioned. I believe in a proper telephone. Talk to people. And see people.
I can tell. I've got to
James,
go to the.
I know, let you go, James. But I'm listening like you've never seen. Carry on with LBC. It is. you've got it right.
Well,
Thank you very much for listening.
I'm
to
on
me.
my toes now, and thank you. Don't go yet. I just want to read you some of the messages that have come in while you've been talking. All right,
please.
A fabulous call. Ask this lady to start a podcast, please. The world is in a dreadful state. We need more Renee. This lovely lady is so right. She has me in tears. This lovely lady has made me cry. I'd run through a brick wall for this lady, says Ollie in Cheltenham. Please, can we clone Renee? We need more of her, and her chicken soup needs to be available on the NHS. And I could go on. So just take that from me, will you? All right.
Do you know what? I'm sorry before I go, James. Before you go, I would love to go into politics and get to the nitty gritty of everything, because unfortunately we go off in this country where whoever's in power, they seem to go off the grid. We've got to get to the nitty gritty of everything.
I couldn't agree more. My only caution, if you did go into politics, Renee, would be that PMQs would take a day and a half. But I have loved talking to you, and I also, if I may, I also honour your father's memory, because you obviously have him in your thoughts every time that you work through these incredibly difficult times and arrive at such beautiful conclusions. Thank you for sharing them with us all today. It's 11:23.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 25 minutes after 11. If you're just tuning in, then you need to listen to the podcast later, or indeed activate your Rewind Live Radio option to find out why we are coming back from that last junction considerably later than usual, even by my standards, because have a little listen back and you will agree that it was completely worth it. Let's crack on with this conversation before Simon Marks joins us from DC after the 11:30 news. Henny is in Fulham. Henny, what would you like to say?
Well, what I'd like to say is a lot of people are not addressing the elephant in the room, which is Israeli public. The Israeli public are okay with this genocide, the majority of whom have actually said, many polls have indicated that they're okay with it. They're
okay with the tactics and the military offensives, and many of them will dispute or agree with their leaders that the use of the word genocide is unacceptable. But they wouldn't say, I don't think yet, that I am in favour of genocide. If you see what I mean, I'm not splitting hairs. I think it's an important point to make.
Well, let me just...
Because they wouldn't agree that it was genocide. So, it might be semantic, but it's also true.
Okay, but let me give it to you from a point of view of a Palestinian, which I am.
Yes.
I'm a Palestinian, okay? If 60,000 plus people, plus many hundreds of thousands under the rubble, nobody knows exact numbers, okay? How much more, how many would indicate genocide? Yeah. When will the Israeli public call it a genocide? That's the question. And the critical question to that is, why are they letting Benjamin Netanyahu carry on, even though they know what's being done is not right and it's illegal, and the whole world is turning against them?
I mean, to be fair, we've asked that question many times and assembled a variety of answers, the most obvious of which involve the very real sense of existential threat for which there is both current and historical justification, the notion that Israel is the place to which Jewish people go when it starts happening again, as history teaches us it is likely, if not certain to. And then, of course, the question of what security entails, and if security entails the removal of threats, potential or real, from borders, then the pushing back, the expansion of the borders becomes a defensible military and political ambition, doesn't it? But none of that, I would argue, takes into account the basic humanity of Palestinian people.
No, and not only that, but you have to remember, the Jewish nation of Israel was founded on terrorism. They had their own terrorist groups that used to kill British officers back in the 1940s.
Why do you have to remember that? I'm not asking you a silly question. Why do you think it is important to remember that in the context of the current conversation? Unless you're questioning the legitimacy of the modern state of Israel, which you're entitled to do, but we should be clear about what your intention is.
We have to go back to the British Mandate and find out what was said then and what was supposed to be agreed, because October 7th was not the beginning of this genocide. It goes all the way back when the British was in control of Palestine.
But what would that help unravel? Because I've heard this argument a lot, and I don't agree or disagree with it. But I don't know what it would help on. What do you think it would achieve? Let's imagine that right now everybody in the world, in Israel and beyond, had a full grasp of the Balfour Declaration, of the backdrop to the foundation of the modern state of Israel, possibly a side order of Old Testament studies as well, and everybody was suddenly inculcated with that knowledge. What would change, in your view?
I think the Israeli public have never really ventured back in their history to find out what really happened.
I think you're probably wrong.
No, I'm not wrong. If you ask any typical Israeli, if you ask them, what do you know about the Nakba?
But again, I don't know if you've misunderstood my question. So you're suggesting that if the average member of the Israeli public understood the full history of the foundation of Israel and the precursors to it, then they would what? They'd agree that the modern state of Israel shouldn't exist?
No, they would not. They would say we have to share this land.
Okay, so the two states,
not ready to do that.
So, and that's why Noga was.
And you have to remember, James.
Go on.
This whole facade of two-state solution has been a facade. Benjamin Netanyahu never intended that to happen.
That's true, and
never will. And they dragged it on and on and on. They took more land.
But other Israeli leaders have sincerely pursued a two-state solution.
Happened to Rabin?
I know, but I'm gonna think more about Renee, the caller who was on before you, and recognise, because you started by talking about the Israeli public, and recognise that opinions can change, but how you change them is, of course, a question for the ages. I don't know that there is an elephant in the room. I think we've been pretty clear on two things: A, that there is still widespread support for Benjamin Netanyahu, even as the word genocide is introduced to the conversation by, or reintroduced or enforced by the United Nations, and even as his own position for many, both inside and outside Israel, looks increasingly desperate and dangerous. Of course there is still support for it, otherwise he wouldn't still be there. 11:31 is the time. Thank you, Henny. I'm a little late for the news with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 26 minutes to 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I haven't fully got my head around the reasons why the murder of Charlie Kirk has prompted such an extraordinary reaction on this side of the Atlantic. I think it has an awful lot to do with the onlineification of public discourse, and perhaps the fury that has greeted some coverage of what he actually said. I still balk at that statement. How can people be cross about repeating the words or even playing out the words of a man fated as a champion of freedom of speech? Well, the answer is that they didn't want those words to be out there. I've subsequently discovered that he was a motivational speaker, and not unlike Andrew Tate luring people in to his world with fast cars, Charlie Kirk would appeal to young people with relatively uncontroversial comments, and it was the controversial ones that his admirers and fans appeared to be incapable of, or very, very reluctant to remember. And of course, another part of that might be that if people are going to react to the less pleasant things that he said and stood for, then, well, how are you going to deal with them unless you have somehow demonised the people who are repeating the less pleasant things he said and stood for? Which brings us to Karen Attaya, until very recently a Washington Post columnist, and it brings us to Simon Marks, still currently the LBC Washington editor. Who is Karen, and what has happened to her, and why is it indicative of rather bigger issues, Simon?
Well, James, she has been, up until yesterday, one of the most prominent figures on the Washington journalism scene, the global opinions editor for the Washington Post. She, in fact, founded the global opinions page under the tutelage of the late Fred Hyatt, a highly respected journalist in Washington who headed the entire opinion section for the Washington Post. All of that, of course, was before Jeff Bezos and the CEO CEO of the Washington Post, Sir Will Lewis, a Brit, of course, with a long and controversial track record on Fleet Street, decided essentially to bend the knee before Donald Trump. And so Karen Attiah was yesterday fired, summarily dismissed by the Washington Post. They say for a series of social media postings, many of which she contrasted the treatment of white Americans with black Americans in the United States. She herself is a black American, and they now say that some of those historic social media messages breached the guidelines of the Washington Post, but they've also gone after her over some of her postings regarding the death of Charlie Kirk. She has become one of several standard bearers that are now essentially being cancelled by their employers, who are coming under pressure from the Trump administration to brook not just no celebration of Charlie Kirk's assassination, but specifically any criticism of Charlie Kirk also is now leading to this crowd-sourced effort to oust employees from their places of work all over the country. And we're seeing thousands of people now falling victim to an effort by a political party that in the past has always insisted that cancel culture is a terrible thing, but now they're absolutely embracing it with a blunderbuss.
So cancel culture is real, but it is essentially being undertaken on an extraordinary scale by people who, either exaggerated or completely lied about its real purpose and introduction by people they perceive as the political enemy. How mild a criticism might jeopardise your job? How mild a criticism of the late Charlie Kirk might jeopardise your job in Donald Trump's America?
Well, the difficulty with all of this is it depends on your definitions, right? It depends on your definition of mild. It depends on your definition of celebrate. It depends on your definition of civility. Let's start by taking a listen to what Vice President J.D. Vance had to say yesterday. He was hosting the Charlie Kirk Show from the White House, a special edition of the webcast that the late conservative activist used to host on a daily basis. And he absolutely encouraged Charlie Kirk's admirers, followers, and Republicans all over the country to engage in acts of cancel culture. Take a listen.
There is no unity with people who scream at children over their parents' politics. There is no unity with someone who lies about what Charlie Kirk said in order to excuse his murder. So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer. We don't believe in political violence, but we do believe in civility.
Now, we can obviously interrogate the argument that J.D. Vance advances that the Trump administration believes in civility, because there are numerous examples available to us to demonstrate that, in fact, that is not the case. But let's look at concrete examples of people that have been that are coming under enormous pressure. Elizabeth Spears is a writer for The Nation magazine. Members of Congress are now threatening to strip the Ford Foundation, which funds The Nation magazine in part, of all of its federal funding because Ms. Spears authored an article headlined "Charlie Kirk's Legacy Deserves No Mourning." Note the careful use of the wording there. And she actually argues in the article that there is no requirement to take part in the whitewashing campaign of Charlie Kirk's legacy, and refusing to join in doesn't make anyone a bad person. We have seen other figures that have been facing termination of their employment. The Mayo Clinic, the revered Mayo Clinic, one of the world's leading medical institutions and, of course, research facilities, is being threatened with cuts in all federal funding by members of Congress because one employee of this vast healthcare system on social media responded to the appearance over the weekend by Charlie Kirk's widow when she first marked the death of her husband, I think on Thursday it was of last week, by putting a message on X describing her appearance as receiving the Academy Award nomination for Best Actress in a Faux Christian Role. Now, you may completely disagree with that. You may argue that it was deeply insensitive. But the notion that that rises to the level of necessarily celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination, and even, by the way, there is no evidence to produce that to show that celebrating Charlie Kirk's assassination, appalling though that obviously would be when it occurs, that may still be protected by America's First Amendment, the constitutional protection of free speech in this country. And many of these cases where people are being fired or being threatened with their jobs are going to end up in the courts. And you've got top corporations here and institutions caving to this sort of political pressure that is on them, being led from the White House, knowing that at the end of the day they may end up paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages to the people that are being fired, but they would sooner do that than incur the wrath of the Trump administration.
Well, we've got reports here of a teacher in Staffordshire being under investigation as well, although I'll look a little deeper into that when I finish talking to you. And when I do talk to you, Simon, it increasingly occurs to me that every conversation we have needs to be contextualised by the last 10 conversations that we've had, because a lot of what Donald Trump and his allies are undertaking is only possible because of the erosion of norms and the erosion of traditional protections and checks and balances. You wouldn't be able to essentially spout the sort of nonsense that J.D. Vance spouted during Donald Trump's first term, even after the assassination of an ally, of somebody like Charlie Kirk. It is a fear among your profession. The New York Times now being sued for $15 billion, which, as we would both know, is designed to frighten them when they are minded to tell the truth. There's no prospect of any libel settlement going the president's way. But the bit I don't get and never get and need context for is how they get away with it. So I find myself thinking of Alex Jones, a man who responded famously, infamously, to a school massacre by claiming that it wasn't true, by accusing the survivors and the parents of dead children of being liars. And he remains very much persona grata among Donald Trump's closest allies. So the blatancy, let alone the transparency of the hypocrisy, the lies and the double standards in play here, are so huge that I don't quite understand how people can not see them.
Well, it's also worth underscoring that long after Alex Jones started spouting those falsehoods about that elementary school massacre in Connecticut, Donald Trump was still a regular guest on Alex Jones's daily broadcasts.
So was Nigel Farage, actually.
So this sudden found discovery that civility in public life is something that zealously needs to be protected. I mean, if the Trump administration is truly serious about that, that will represent to some extent a 180-degree reversal of where Donald Trump has been throughout the course of his presidency. If you think back to his first term, addressing a rally in which he mocked openly a disabled reporter with the New York Times, of course, the newspaper that he is now suddenly this morning suing for defamation. But they're taking this to a new extent. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, announced over the weekend that American Airlines and Delta Airlines had fired some employees for what he claimed was celebrating Charlie Kirk's killing. And he then said, any company responsible for the safety of the travelling public cannot tolerate that behaviour. So there is suddenly now a bar in place for airline pilots and flight attendants and other airline employees that are actively involved in conveying the public on aircraft. There's basically a question in place that links their ability to perform their jobs to their behavior on social media and what they may or may not have said about Charlie Kirk. What they're trying to do at the White House is use this to absolutely encourage their supporters to get outraged over things that are taking place in the days since Charlie Kirk's murder, using it, by the way, to fundraise and hoping that this is going to create a tidal wave of fury and therefore support for the Republicans that will boost their opportunities in the midterm elections in November of next year. J.D. Vance has been absolutely open about this and has said one of the ways in which you can honour Charlie's legacy is to make sure that this fuels the Republican Party's victory in November 2026 at a time when, on that Charlie Kirk show again that he was hosting yesterday, the Vice President allowed the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, again to give voice to his threat to send people who have breached these very opaque, unclear guidelines rather than laws that the Trump administration is trying to enforce on social media. He's talking about sending them into exile, American citizens, exiling them from the United States. This is now an out-of-control series of conversations that are taking place here.
And at the heart of it, of course, remains the simple fact that you would not be honouring his legacy by telling people what he said and stood for. That is exactly the point. That is an offence now.
That is exactly the point. And people are being chased as a result of this crowd-sourced effort to shame critics of Charlie Kirk. Their employers are being chased to get rid of them, in many cases, simply for quoting what Charlie Kirk had to say. There's an Army colonel who has been fired by the Pentagon, a man by the name of Scott Stevens, for taking to social media and writing this: "The death of Charlie Kirk in Utah was tragic. However, we can take comfort in the fact that Charlie was doing what he loved best, spreading hate, racism, homophobia, misogyny and transphobia on college campuses." For that, this colonel in the American Army was fired. There are other people in various positions of employment who are being gone after because they have directly quoted from Charlie Kirk. And the programme you did last week, in which you simply read Charlie Kirk's own words.
No, I played them out. I didn't even read them. I played them out. I can forgive you for not listening. You'd have still been in bed. But I used actual tapes rather than my voice. It was his voice. People have had quite enough of my voice. But that has caused a bit of a rumpus online as well, apparently.
That would have caused a huge rumpus here.
I've got the phrase criminalising criticism forming in my mind. They're trying to criminalise criticism.
Yes.
This is really scary.
I think that's exactly what they are trying to do, and that is what they are threatening to do. And they're not even necessarily threatening to take legislative action to put new laws into place, because they never have any interest, particularly in passing laws in Congress. All of this is going to be promulgated by executive order, including, by the way, an executive order that preceded Charlie Kirk's assassination. The President of the United States a couple of weeks ago announced that burning the American flag was henceforward to be considered criminal behaviour and prosecuted to the full extent of the law, which is very problematic because the Supreme Court has already previously ruled that burning the American flag is an example of protected free speech in the United States. So they're simply trying to ride roughshod, even over Supreme Court precedents.
Hard to keep track, but as ever, it's a bit easier after we've spoken to you, Simon. And of course, we could probably expect J.D. Vance to be lecturing us on free speech once again, very shortly. Simon Marks live from Washington, D.C. as the United States President. Does Vance come with him? Does the Vice President travel with the President on a state visit, or does he stay at home? I presume he stays at home, actually. 10 to 12 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
7 minutes to 12. And this has been bubbling away. I know you, like me, will be deeply disturbed by what Simon just told us if you weren't already aware of it. And I think it was right to mention Alex Jones. And, of course, you know, Trump's our sort of pound shop version in this country, very much at the heart of this kind of process, whining about free speech while being passionately opposed to almost anybody else's. It was indeed on the Alex Jones platform that he appeared to compare parents bereaved by the Sandy Hook school shooting, who sued the far-right conspiracy theorist Jones, to left-wingers trying to curb free speech. He described Jones's experiences, which was essentially being criticised and sued by parents of dead children that he accused of lying. Farage's words were, "The left and the state are fighting back with all their might," after Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. And then, just to sum the guy up, really, when he was accused of having done this last year, a spokesman for him said he wasn't even sure that Farage was aware of Sandy Hook at the time of the interview in April of 2018. So 6 years previously, 26 people had been killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut, one of the worst school shootings in US history. Alex Jones called all of the bereaved parents liars, claimed that the entire thing was a hoax, and 6 years later Nigel Farage can appear on his programme and defend himself against accusations of comparing those parents to liberals trying to curb free speech by saying he didn't even know about the massacre. It's so hard to tell when he's lying, isn't it? Although I think his lips moving is a bit of a giveaway. So let's turn our attention to this man's relationship with free speech. I told you yesterday I was struck by an article he wrote in the Daily Mail in which he said several things that were absolutely outrageous. For example, when Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper posted condolences online for Charlie Kirk, many were quick to point out that had Charlie been in the UK, Labour would probably have had him locked up. Again, many who and why would they post condolences of someone that they would have locked up? And can we think of an example of somebody who has been locked up for expressing views similar in the public space to Charlie Kirk's? And by locked up, I mean imprisoned. You might perhaps think of Lucy Connolly, to whom we will turn our attention in a moment. And this is the bit that I accept, that I really thought was intriguing. Farage wrote in the Daily Mail on Friday, the Daily Mail, of course, which has a long and very unproud history of supporting fascism. "I have always accepted, however, as I thought most people do, that there is just one limit to freedom of speech, and that is when you cross the line from argument and opinion over to incitement to violence." So hold that thought while we look at something else he said. "If political or media figures launch ad hominem attacks on those they disagree with, repeatedly comparing their opponents to the Nazis or mass murderers, I think the case can be made that this amounts to incitement. After all, why would anybody bother debating reasonably with a Nazi?" And that's an intervention of such epic unintelligence that you can probably forgive him for not realising how stupid he was being. If you call me a Nazi now, it doesn't make me a Nazi. What it makes you do is say, could I see some evidence, please, for why you would back this up? But what I want you to hold on to is the thought that Nigel Farage thinks that citing Adolf Hitler or Nazis when you are talking about public figures or politicians amounts to incitement, or he thinks the case can be made that this amounts to incitement. Here's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., currently Secretary of State for Health in Donald Trump's administration, speaking just a few years ago.
You can see that every statement that Donald Trump makes is fear-based. No, we have to be fear of the Muslims. We have to be fear of the black people, and particularly the big black guy, Obama, who's destroying this country, who's making everybody miserable, and only one person has the genius and the capacity to solve these things. He's not like Hitler. Hitler had like a plan. Hitler was interested in policy.
So Robert F. Kennedy there suggesting Donald Trump's a kind of Hitler without a plan. And here is the Vice President, J.D. Vance, speaking just a couple of years ago.
You said, I'm a never Trump guy. Never liked him. Terrible candidate. Idiot if you voted for him. Might be America's Hitler. Might be a cynical a-hole. Cultural heroine. Noxious and reprehensible. Those are things that the left is going to come after you, and they're probably going to be put in ads should you be chosen as the VP pick. How do you deal with them now?
Yeah, well, I think the simple answer is you've got to respect the American people enough to just level with them. Look, I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
comparing him to Hitler, though. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, talking to Fox News' Brett Bayer there and making a comparison that Nigel Farage thinks amounts to incitement. So I don't know why the Fox News host is saying that the left will be coming after J.D. Vance, when Nigel Farage is no doubt going to be issuing a very, very strong condemnation of both of these comparisons by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and indeed by J.D. Vance, by mentioning Hitler in the context of discussing Donald Trump. The other element that is frankly remarkable is the claim that J.D. Vance made in the clip that Simon played to us about making personal attacks on people, which is essentially all that Donald Trump did for much of his political career. But I want to stay with Farage, if I may, and I want to talk to you about incitement, because this is what he actually wrote. The Daily Mail, I don't know whether they paid him or not, but if they did, perhaps they can get a refund. I have always accepted, however, as I thought most people do, that there is just one limit to freedom of speech, and that is when you cross the line from argument and opinion over to incitement to violence. You'll be familiar, of course, with Lucy Connolly. Here is a form that she signed in the presence of her lawyer before pleading guilty to the crimes for which she was imprisoned. And this cropped up, if anyone could be bothered to read it, in her appeal against the original sentence. I, Lucy Connolly, confirm that I do not wish to enter a basis of plea, and I understand that this means I am conceding that at the point I published the tweet, I intended to incite as per the Category 1 feature. I do this as I do not believe I will be successful at a Newton hearing, and I do not want to risk my credit. This is my decision under no pressure from anyone else. I know, therefore, that this would be a Category 1A offence with a starting point of 3 years imprisonment. I mean, I don't know the last time you signed a document saying, I confirm that I published the tweet, that when I published the tweet, I intended to incite as per the category. Nigel Farage's view on free speech is that when you cross the line from argument and opinion over to incitement to violence, your freedom of speech becomes unsustainable. Lucy Connolly signs a document stating that at the point she published the tweet she was jailed for, she intended to incite. So what does a man who says that incitement is the point at which free speech should be restricted, how does a man like that deal with a woman who literally states in legal documents that she published a tweet intended to incite? How could that possibly play out? How could Farage's insistence that incitement is the point at which free speech should cease to apply square with a woman who admits literally incitement? And in fact, it goes further. During this appeal, the court found, and I quote, "We regret to have to say that we found the evidence of the applicant about these important matters incredible. Her evidence to this court showed her to be intelligent and articulate, with strong views, and, because of the circumstances in which her son died, a deep mistrust of anyone who might be regarded as a person in authority telling her what to do or to believe. Given her personal circumstances at the time of her arrest and her understandable concern for her daughter, any reference to a prison sentence, let alone a sentence based on a starting point of 3 years, must have caused her great anxiety. In those circumstances, we are quite unable to accept that she signed the endorsement without any understanding of its references to the culpability factor or the starting point. We are also unable to accept her state of ignorance in that regard continued throughout further conferences with Mr. Muir, or that she entered her guilty plea with no understanding of what it entailed. Her acceptance that she read and was content with Mr. Muir's sentencing note," this is her original lawyer, "which includes references to the sentencing guideline and to the aggravating feature specifically mentioned in the guideline, clearly shows that she was well aware of what she was admitting." So again, how does a man who insists that incitement is the point at which freedom of speech ceases to apply and should not apply deal with a woman who admits to incitement, conscious incitement, and when she tries to get her sentence reduced by claiming that she didn't know what she was admitting to, the court comes about as close as it can in legal terms to calling her a liar? How on earth would Nigel Farage deal with somebody like Lucy Connolly, who has clearly committed a crime of incitement, which he says is the point at which freedom of speech should no longer apply? Well, I think you already know.
She's a wonderful mum, wife, beloved childminder, little kids from every corner of the earth she's taken wonderful care of. So I am, of course, referring to Britain's favourite political prisoner. Ladies and gentlemen, please give the warmest of welcomes to Lucy Connolly.
suppose we should be grateful that it wasn't Andrea Jenkins singing the theme tune, but that was a Daily Telegraph columnist called Alison Pearson and somebody called Liam Halligan welcoming to the stage of Nigel Farage's current political party a woman who has, by his own account, breached the threshold at which he feels free speech should no longer apply, being introduced as a political prisoner by some of his cronies at his own conference. I don't know what the word is to describe that, because the words I can think of don't come close. She was also, of course, photographed in a warm embrace with Mr. Farage, which is one reason perhaps to extend sympathy to her. But the idea that you can be simultaneously guilty of incitement and that incitement can be the point at which free speech no longer applies and that Nigel Farage can be a trusted agent when it comes to discussing free speech is yet another mark of just how mad things have already become.
James O'Brien on LBC.
7 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're going to change pace completely now because the absolute madness of people who hate free speech claiming that they're defending our free speech, and not entirely dissimilar, the findings today about Israel committing genocide in Gaza, even as Israel says, no, we're not. Quick, look over there. We're bombing it again. It just takes a toll, doesn't it? So here's a completely different story. Two headlines that I am, in my own inimitable fashion, going to knit together for your delectation. Gen Z, 2/3 of Gen Z, or do you say Gen Z or Gen Z? I've asked you this before. I will always say Z. I think I will always say Gen Z. Because I have to resist the Americanization of His Majesty's English. I think that is the first time I've said His Majesty's English, or said His Majesty, without originally saying Her Majesty and then remembering to correct myself. So go me. 2/3 of Gen Z stay indoors for days at a time. Days at a time. And the second one, teenage boys spend more time gaming than at school. So this is boys aged between 15 and 17 who are putting in an average of 34 hours a week playing video games while spending about 32 and a half hours a week at school. Sometimes I catch myself trying too hard to be balanced, because I was minded this hour, or at least in this introduction, to begin to assemble a question that would be akin to asking you whether this was really that bad after all. I'm going to do it. The problem is, you know what you do to me every day? The problem is I start explaining things to you and my brain starts firing back. And I start actually questioning whether or not my original conviction that I settled on just before I started talking to you was the correct one to settle on. I had this producer many years ago. Lovely bloke. And he used to get so cross when people like me, I was about 10 years older than him, he used to get so cross when we started moaning about kids not spending more time outdoors. So this is a hardy perennial of a subject, but the temptations of technology, I think we could all agree, have grown exponentially since I started in this job about years ago. And he used to point out that, and I don't think he'd mind me saying he wasn't good at games. He wasn't one of those kids that would be picked first for football, for example. Nor was I, for the record, but I wasn't picked last either, like most people. So he used to point out how ridiculous it was to say things like, why are children playing football on their video games? Why are children playing football on their consoles when they could be out playing football in the park or out playing football in the field? To which the quite obvious response was, then and even more so now, is that when I'm playing football on my PlayStation or my Xbox, I can actually personally execute an overhead kick, the likes of which you would have to be Cristiano Ronaldo, Wayne Rooney, Lionel Messi, or Peter Crouch. Don't at me, all right? I know how controversial lists like that can get, but they're the ones that popped into my head because I think they're the ones I've most recently seen undertake extraordinary, world-class, or worldy, if you prefer, bicycle kicks. So why on earth? I mean, I like a kickabout. I don't do it now. I loved the kickabout as a kid. But I also love being able to execute footballing moves that are amazing. And I can't really do that in the park because I'm not good enough at football, and I never was. And I always found that a really persuasive argument. I like the things, you know, I do it for a living. I like the thoughts and the insights that make you think again about something. So you'd go from that slightly lazy knee-jerk reaction, kids should be outside more, to why would you want to go out? I mean, soldiers. I used to love playing soldiers. I went to an all-boys school. Seriously, don't at me. Playing soldiers. But you could play Call of Duty. You can actually play soldiers. You can actually play soldiers with kind of like, quotes, real, end quotes, guns. Why would you want to... So I understand the appeal. And I recently spent hours, I don't think 34 hours in a single week, but I spent a long time. And I only do 15 hours a week at work, remember, so it would be quite easy for me to overtake that with video game activity. I spent a long time playing the new Indiana Jones game. And continue to play it despite having completed it. It's a wonderful game. One of the best games in years. If you're like me and you kind of have let it slide a bit in recent years, but you used to really love it. They're not cheap these days. If you haven't kept up with that, you're not going to get much change out of 100 quid for a brand new video game. But if you can afford that, and if you've got a console somewhere in the attic, then that is the best game I've played in an extremely long time. And all of those arguments work, right? There are a million reasons why a young person today is going to spend a lot more time indoors than outdoors. Or there are a million reasons why a young person today is going to spend a lot more time indoors than we did. And I know I said I wasn't going to be balanced, but as I finish that observation, I find myself wondering whether that is definitely a bad thing. And that's what I want you to do. I want to work from the position, I am going to adopt the position that it is definitely a bad thing. It must be awful to spend days on end indoors. It's partly because of the COVID pandemic, it is argued. Old habits are proving hard to shake for Generation Z and indeed for millennials. More than half of them, 67% of Generation Z and 57% of millennials say that there are times when they do not go outside for days. Days. What? How? If you're not ill, how can you go for days without going outdoors? 0345 6060 973. That's actually the first question. How can you do that? I mean, literally. How can you not just want a bit of fresh air? What did you miss most during lockdown? I missed most during lockdown was big skies. I've told you this a million times. It was the air. But here's a rather harder thing to pin down. Why is this a bad thing? Why is this a bad thing? I am 53 years old. I know what you're thinking. I've seen you on YouTube. You look much younger, but I am. I'm 53 years old. 54 next birthday. That's not an opinion, it's counting. I am 53 years old, and I have grown up during I've grown up in the eye of this particular storm. I'm a bit too old for the social media storm, but I have grown up literally in the eye of the video game storm, which is a large part of this conversation, but not, of course, all of it. You could be watching Bake Off, not necessarily playing Call of Duty. But I went from essentially being the entry-level video game player when it was just pixels moving up and down a screen. I always forget whether the game was called Ping or Pong, but essentially two bats moving up and down the screen with a ball blipping in between them. And then that evolved into Breakout, when the ball would destroy bricks and the bat would move along the bottom of the screen and the ball would dip up and down and destroy bricks, and you had to position the bat at the bottom correctly so the angle of the ball going. I still like that game, would you believe? And then I was at the vanguard of the home computer revolution. You can in fact see me make an appearance in a wonderful little film called The Rubber Keyed Wonder about the ZX Spectrum, to which I contributed. It's a beautiful film. You met the makers of it on this programme not long ago. And I was there. Then I would have spent 34 hours during the school holidays, because I wasn't allowed my computer at school. During the school holidays, absolutely no problem. I could have spent literally a full-time job playing video games on a platform where the technology was actually ridiculous. The patience that you needed. You could spend hours loading a game, not hours, but like 20 minutes loading a game, and it wouldn't work, and you just have to rewind the tape and start again. What's that you say, young person? What's a tape? Ask your granddad. And I was there for that. And then I was pretty much at the vanguard, just beginning to have enough cash in the bank and perhaps earning money or having a student loan. So I was able to get in on the ground floor of the consoles, get a PlayStation when PlayStations were new. I even had a Sega Mega Drive. Does anyone remember those? Got an Xbox. And then, wonder of wonders, I think I've told you this before. So you go back to the Spectrum, you could be... and the Atari, my mate Timothy had an Atari where you stuck the cartridges in the machine. So my age, 53, is probably the sweet spot for this. Give or take 2 years one way or the other. And then something quite incredible happened. I've done it again, aren't I? I want you to tell me why it's a bad thing that kids aren't going outdoors, and I want you to tell me why you or your kid are not going outdoors, all right? And I want you to ring me now on this, 03456060973, because I don't want to get to another half past without having taken a single call, but I have got something quite special to tell you, and I'll tell it to you about what happened next in my video game playing life. The next thing that happened, and you may know it, but I've got so many more listeners now than I had last time I told this story. What happened next was incredible, but also when I tell you where it happened, it was quite shocking. So what you'll do when I tell you this story is you'll go, wow, James, you're so cool, and then as I reach the end of the story, you'll go, oh my God, James, I can't believe you did that. And if that's not a hook and tease, then I don't know what is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12 is the time. And what happened next was absolutely magical. I was round at my mate Luke's house. I was at his mum's flat. And my phone rang. And it was an old pal of mine from my newspaper days. I'd been doing this job for a while at the time. And he said, hello, old boy. Am I right in thinking that you enjoy playing video games? And I said, yeah, you are. Why? And he goes, well, they've just put me in charge of the the features section on the paper. He worked for a very popular national newspaper. And he said, I think I need a video game reviewer. Would you like to be the video game reviewer for our newspaper? And I said, yes. And I got on the phone to the video games people. And within about a week, certainly within a month, I was on all the mailing lists and I got sent every single video game that was being released pretty much in the world for the foreseeable future. And then I got sent like consoles with special chips in them that meant you could hop to the end of a game. You could play, you could jump in at any point. Have you heard of these chipped consoles? I don't even know if they're still a thing. Like beta testing, and you'd send games that hadn't been released yet. Obviously, like all critics, you get sent stuff that hasn't been released yet. And then I started getting sent things like limited edition Konami joysticks that like somebody in Japan would pay £250 for on eBay. And well, this is the bit where you go, wow, that's not you're so cool, but that's so cool. That's such a cool thing to happen. And now I spoil it all by saying it was the Daily Mail. And that's 52% of the bad news. The other 48% of the bad news is it happened at completely the wrong time in my life. It's just not around about the time my oldest daughter was born. So we really are going back. And of course, for the first time in my life, I had this wonderful job, which I clocked off at lunchtime. And that brief window where I could then spend the rest of my life playing video games, started off on daytime television and finish at 11 o'clock in the morning. I could play video games for the rest of the day. But then I had a baby, so there's no earthly way that I could go home and not look after the baby. So it was the worst possible time of my life. I wouldn't change anything, don't get me wrong. The worst imaginable time. I kept it up for a couple of years, longer perhaps, and I loved doing it. But towards the end, I wasn't playing the games long enough to get a proper idea of how good they were. But I got paid. I got paid money to play video games. Even now, in my dotage, I tell my daughter's friends, especially the lads who love video games, I tell my daughter's friends that I used to get paid to play video games. They look at me as if it's the closest I'll ever come to having a sort of hero status among the younger generation. You did what? I got paid to play video games. And this is the bit where I go, it didn't do me any harm. So how worried should we be that A, Generation Z is staying indoors for days at a time? I think I'm a lot more worried about that. And B, teenage boys are spending more time playing video games than they are at school. Let's start with Ibrahim, who is in Tower Hamlets. Ibrahim, what would you like to say?
Hi, pal. So just to give a little background quickly of myself. So I'm an attendance and welfare advisor. So I am having to deal with a lot of kids that don't come to school because they spend days at home. And the reason why I think that is, and you mentioned, just before I called, you mentioned you were like 53. I'm 29.
Yeah.
Right. The difference between
what do you want to know? Ask me anything, Ibrahim.
Yeah. So the difference between me and you isn't much because our lifestyles were similar. Look, you played games.
Yeah.
I played games too, but we wanted to go tell our friends back at school or back outside, or I played this, or come round to my house to play this. But if now games are so, created in a way where you don't need to leave your house, you can record everything on, if they want to stream it or whatever they're doing nowadays. Why do you need to go outside? That's why they're all just stuck at home, and they've given me a job to do to get them back into school.
Well, you've raised a lot of points. So the first is, for any generational confusion, the first is that they are actually socialising. So they're not socially isolated in the way that you would have been in the 1990s and a little later. If you were spending 34 hours a week playing video games, then unless your mates were round at your house playing with you, which was a thing, that's why consoles have more than one controller, then you would be you wouldn't be speaking to anybody. So that's gone. You've got your headset on, you're talking to people you do know in real life, you're talking to people you don't know in real life. I've even got a mate who catches up with his son by playing video games together down the headset when they're living in different houses. So that is both a good thing and potentially a bad thing. But what you then have is your testimony, which involves children with their parents' connivance or lethargy or not, actually being so saturated with potential content that they just can't be bothered to go to school anymore. How do you deal with that?
So it's such a difficult thing that I'm dealing with. There's so many professionals sometimes involved with some of these children just to get them back into school. A massive part of my job is to do home visits and, just to assess what's going on. I'm not a social worker, but it is.
Do you work for a school or do you work for several schools?
No, I work for several schools. Okay. I did work for a school before. I've been doing attendance now for 6 years.
Wow.
It's a very it's in different boroughs across London, Tower Hamlets, London Borough, Barking and Dagenham, Lewisham. So I've been around London a little bit to say that ultimately, if now a parent doesn't have some control over the content that their child is consuming or the games that they're playing or how long they're playing for, we're going to see more and more of this.
Because the lure is so... I mean, there's a logic to it. It's brilliant. So, of course, I'm going to do that instead of going to school.
Yeah, and the thing is, right, my main thing is, look, I'm a bit younger than you, but regardless, it's the same thing, yeah?
Go on.
We went to school to actually talk to our mates and
I
say,
get
you know
this.
what?
So you don't even need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
How many parents know? The worst offenders you deal with?
Yeah.
How many of them have parents who are just looking the other way, not bothering, or do they leave the house and then come home when their parents have gone to work? I mean, is there a typical school avoider in the context of doing it because they want to, not because they've got mental health issues and they can't do it? The kids who are literally choosing not to go, is there a typical type?
Yes, the typical type, I would say, aren't children that have working parents.
Okay.
The typical types are more the people that are, parents are at home, they're not working, there isn't a routine, there isn't that understanding of that, you know what, it's a good thing to go outside and actually meet people, because they're also just sitting at home doing nothing too.
Oh, wow.
So that's just my look. Those are the three boroughs that I've worked in.
Well, you're at the coalface. So there's a sort of opting out of life.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Across the generations.
Yeah, it's crazy, honestly. And the only way to make this better, in my opinion, is for parents to have some sort of course, right, that says this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, but how are we even going to put that in place?
So you can even get your groceries delivered these days, don't you? It's not even cooked food. It's not even Deliveroo and Just Eat. It's the groceries. So you would choose never to leave. Do you know who the longest is that you've come with? The teenager who spent the longest amount? No, you won't know, will you?
No, I can tell you. The child, I obviously can't go into details.
No, please don't.
But the kids. Let's just put it like this: there's kids that haven't come to school for 2 years.
But we don't. And they may not even have left the house much during that period.
No, they haven't.
Oh,
and
you see, this is... go on.
But when you go to their rooms, right, you'll see every single thing is in there.
So they've got money?
Yeah, definitely. Where they're getting it from, I don't know, and how they're balancing finances, but...
Be a lot of online trading.
Maybe. If you've got a Nintendo Switch, right?
Yeah.
And an iPhone and a PlayStation 5 in front of you, me and you're going to want to come to school, especially if now my mum and dad are at home too doing nothing.
Wow. And what's your biggest secret? I mean, how do you break this cycle?
My biggest secret, because...
Or your best tactic, My
best tactic is, because I really try, especially, I try and make them understand, whilst there is online trading, whilst you could open a business, while you could do all of these things, what if none of that works out? Do you not want something to fall back on?
Yeah.
And even then, they've got so many arguments. Oh, you know what? They start comparing themselves to, the one of 2 million. Or they didn't have nothing. But I really just keep trying to break it down. Look where you live. You're living in X type of property. The people around you are doing this. They're doing that. What do you really want for yourselves?
And how feasible is it that you're going to become the next... I don't know, Kim Kardashian or something like that. So you're a bit like an X Factor judge in the old days when someone walks out onto the stage and they sound like a cat being strangled, and they tell Simon Cowell that they want to be the next Robbie Williams, and your job is to go, look, how likely is it really that you're going to be the next Robbie? You need to go to school, mate, to at least give yourself a few more options than sitting on your backside all day dreaming of a future that is never going to exist, that is never going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. But it's all about breaking it down to them to the T and saying, look, you're saying this, how are you going to get there? Making them work backwards.
Well, how did you get into it? I'm late for the news, so don't take too... How did you get into it?
This role, or do you mean...
Yeah, this work.
Look, I've got a law degree. I didn't want to become a lawyer. I became a teaching assistant.
Yeah.
I worked with a kid that was a school refuser, did these kind of tactics, and then I became an attendance officer, then an attendance manager. Now I work for the local authority because I can't stick in schools because they just don't pay enough.
But you also really enjoy the work.
Yeah, definitely. You know what it is as well? When you see outcomes, like, for example, these boys or these girls that I'm having these conversations with, and then at the end of year 11, they do have some qualifications, right? They're not getting grade 9s and stuff, but they've got some qualifications, and then they come and find you because you live in the local area, or they know somebody that knows you, and they're like, oh, thanks, Mr. Ali, because of, A, B, C, D, I've got this. That just gives you that fulfillment. Because
I bet it does, man. I bet it does.
Yeah.
You're a top man. Thanks for that. I wasn't expecting a call like this during this hour, but that's the nature of the job, isn't it? Can't you get them all to listen to LBC, Ibrahim? At least then they'd have. At least then they'd have a sort of...
why I'm listening to LBC is because I'm doing a home visit. I'm going to another one literally right now.
Well, good luck.
So let me just call quickly and get my views across.
Well, you played a blinder there. That's absolutely. I can feel. I mean, wow. And also some answers there to the question that I never get the answers I want to, which is about this huge conglomerate of people who are not doing anything all day, whatever age they are. Who are they and where are they and why aren't they doing anything all day? What a brilliant person to have on the side of the righteous. It's 12:31. Here's Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35. Few people suggesting that Ibrahim deserved a Ray Liotta. We took a view on that, and there will be other people doing that job, albeit that they may not be as charismatic or as convincing and as fascinating as Ibrahim. But it wasn't quite enough. And I know it was bang on, the fact that he was actually between meetings in homes where children are not going to school and possibly not leaving the building. But I don't know. I just felt it didn't quite breach the threshold. If you disagree, that's absolutely fine. What are we talking about? 2/3 of Generation Z stay indoors for days at a time. Figures not much better for millennials. 57% of millennials say there are times when they do not go outside for days. What is the question? Well, if you are one of these people, the question is why? 03456060973. And if you're not, or even if you are, the question is, what damage does it do? Because it must be doing some. And as a little side order, we've got teenage boys revealing that they now spend 34 hours a week on average playing video games compared to the 32.5 hours a week that they spend at school. So having spoken to Ibrahim, that story diminishes in importance, doesn't it? Because if they're going to school, then that's fine. Fill your boots, play the games, maybe try and go out a little bit. But if you're going to school, that's fine. He's married the two stories together and created this cohort of kids who are they are not going to school, they are not leaving their house, and they are online, living online. Yikes. George is in Chelmsford. George, what would you like to say?
Hello, fella. Yeah, it can do massive amounts of damage. Huge amounts.
Tell me more.
When I was a teenager, all I ever wanted to do was play on computer games all day long. I'll admit to you now, I used to wake up about 2 p.m, turn it straight on, play it all day long until about 4 a.m, and then go back to bed, rinse and repeat. It's addictive. It's a cocaine. It is horribly destructive.
How old are you?
Currently, I'm 33.
And were you supposed to be at school when you were doing this, or was that particular pattern after school or during the holidays, or not?
It would be after school, or it would be immediately after school, about the ages of 17, 18.
Right.
I didn't really get a grip of myself until about 19, early 20.
And if you had to put into... I mean, I hope I've made it clear, I'm no stranger to video games. I don't need lecturing, or not lecturing, I don't need teaching on how addictive they can be and the nature of them. But the damage is going to be very much it's going to be very much case by case, isn't it? Some kids could probably put in the same sort of hours that you put in, but they're doing lots of other things as well, and it's not doing them much harm. How did you notice it was harming you?
It was a breakdown of relationships from a girlfriend to friends.
Really?
You'd find they'd vanish. Yeah, they'd disappear. They'd dissipate.
Oh wow!
My girlfriend used to come round and just be disappointed to see her in that state. Back then, I was blind to it, completely blind. The poor girl, it must have been horrible because.
So you'd expect her to come around and watch you play video games?
Yeah, just essentially just be in the same room or same house, and rarely ever want to go out, do anything at all. And
you caught yourself feeling that the idea of doing anything except plugging yourself straight back in again would sort of make you go, oh no, I don't want to do that. I just want to play more.
Certainly today, I would turn on a game and just think, God, what a waste of a day, complete waste. But back then, no, I was completely blind, completely oblivious to what was going on around me. And social skills, they do not develop because you're not out there. You're not stretching that muscle in your brain to learn new things, how to interact, what social cues. None of it. You're completely blind.
And even if you're doing a lot of... Because, I mean, your age is quite interesting because probably when you started, you didn't have a headset on chatting to mates in the real world or mates in the online world. You would be a more solitary pursuit. But even if you're doing that now and communicate... Because I got godsons who come home from school, plug straight into Fortnite or something like that, and they're playing with their schoolmates, so they're not going to be as exposed to as much damage as you are. But still, some of the social cues that you would expect to pick up from physical interactions, you're probably going to struggle with. You're not going to get...
Yeah, bang on. Back when I was doing it, yeah, it was very much solo. There'd be very little in the way of talking. It would mostly just be swearing and shouting at other people across the globe.
Yeah,
there wasn't
that's
real social interaction at all. There's still a lot of that going on now, but there are plenty of games where you do socialise. They're more like interactive chat rooms nowadays. However, like you say, you're still not in a healthy environment. You're not one-to-one. You're not reading each other's body languages and actually doing, you're not playing golf. You're not out on the swings or kicking a football around with other people, so you're still not learning many other social interactions.
So what did you do? Did you go cold turkey? Did you just you got dumped and decided that's it, I'm not playing anymore, or was it a slow realisation? Final question, how did it end?
Yeah, it was very slow. It was a progressive. When I started to work and started to get more active, you began to wake up, thankfully, very luckily. Yeah, you do, and then you start to take a grip. Many people may not have that strength within themselves to pull them out of the hole. I'm 33 now. In the last 2 weeks, I've transitioned from one job to the next. I've got a few more days to wait till I start my job. However, in this last 2 weeks, I've only left the house once because I've fallen back into a bad habit. And it's cocaine. It's an addictive, horrible thing. And
it's not actually cocaine. You've been playing games again.
Yes,
sorry, I thought you just. Yeah, some people listening will be thinking that you just said you've been snorting cocaine for 2 weeks. No, well, it isn't. Because I mean, you could think of that as a holiday. The danger is when you take holiday behaviours into your normal life, and then everything begins to fray at the edges and fall apart. So don't be too hard on yourself, and just make sure you get stuck straight back into the new routine when you start the new job. Because I could have spent, if I had the time off, I could have probably done that last Indiana Jones game for a week or two straight without any trouble at all. I just started the Harry Potter one, which it's a bit childish compared to the Indiana Jones one, but I can see myself getting very, very immersed in that as well. And there's no harm in that, unless, as George reminds us, unless you've got nothing else going on. And that's what's extraordinary about these children, is that whether through parental neglect or lethargy or ignorance, they don't know that their children are doing this, and they are going for days without leaving their house. There's a new Grand Theft Auto game, I think, is it early next year? That will be a massive game changer. There'll be people, so you make sure you say your goodbyes to your friends in that world, because they will be disappearing for a long time when that new game comes out. Perry's in Newham. Perry, what would you like to say?
Hiya. So I was just calling in to say that I think it's just much easier for both girls and boys to be more online, and it's easier to do that at home. It's just so much more accessible than it's ever been. Sort of 10, 15 years ago, not all teenagers had cell phones, or if they did, they didn't all have internet on it. But now everybody's got a smartphone, and it's just so much easier to be able to stay at home. I do think that there's a disproportional impact on boys and men as opposed to girls, because of the way we socialize boys and men especially.
And I mean, there's two arguments here. There's two sides to this coin. You're on the clever side of the coin. And on the less clever side of the coin sit I. I'm on the less... No, I am, because I'm just saying games are really good. So I'm not really thinking about sociological implications or explanations. I'm just saying, given the choice between doing that or playing that game, I'm probably going to play that game. What you have to do is make it clear that is not a sustainable lifestyle choice for the rest of your...
But the thing is, I think for boys and men, that seems like a completely reasonable choice that a lot of people in your peer group are doing. So that's very much, you feel like, yep, I belong to this community. This is what like-minded people do. I feel connected to people like that. And a lot of that is, unfortunately, boys and men. I don't really know why girls aren't playing that as much. I genuinely think it's because we socialize girls to need a lot more, to, be more social. I think women are generally better at building community. And I know it's like a microaggression at work now, like asking...
So it's nurture rather than nature?
I think predominantly it is,
I think you're probably
because
right.
I think without any external social influences, I don't think boys and girls are that different at what they would choose to do. I think it's sociological factors that draw one group of people into one area.
And how could you tell? How would you spot the child who was, if you had 5 children in front of you and one of them was spending 40 hours a week on their video games and never leaving the house, apart from their sort of pallid complexion, how would you tell? How would you spot them?
How would I? But if they're in my house,
what would they be displaying? What traits would the child be like? The children that Ibrahim works with, how would we spot them in company with children who are not caught up in this cycle?
I think the number one trait would be if they're in an unfamiliar situation, which of the 5 is more likely to just give up, and which ones are resourceful and will make a connection with the person standing next to them and ask questions and build a rapport, and they've got those social skills, whereas I think somebody that's less used to doing that would probably be the quieter.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be right, although I'd like to think that my experiences playing text adventure games on the ZX Spectrum gave me a wonderful ability for getting out of difficult spots and defeating Nazis, escaping from Colditz on one occasion, I seem to remember, and haunted houses galore. I even solved The Hobbit. Well, The Hobbit. That was a Melbourne house, but I'm joking. You're probably right. And of course, a point we often overlook when we're having these conversations is the fact that so many of the other things you could be doing don't exist anymore. Even the free stuff, like your park might be shut, or it might not be safe to hang out there. So there used to be a programme on television when I was young called Why Don't You?, which is wonderful, presented by children. And the theme tune used to go, why don't you turn off your television and go and do something less boring instead? So a sort of variation on turkeys voting for Christmas, television programmes telling you to stop watching television. But it would be jam-packed with things that you could do instead. And it's two things going on. Number one, a lot of those things no longer exist. And number two, you didn't really have the opportunity to plug into an entirely alternative universe when you were that age watching that programme. And so almost like the holodeck on Star Trek, where you could just literally live in an alternative universe. And the temptation is not to be underestimated. Thank you, Perry. It's 12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There were concerns that the so-called Hillsborough law, when it was enacted, would not meet the needs or the demands of many of the campaigners who have been pursuing it. And, well, nowhere would those, given the title of the bill, although that's not the official title, of course, nowhere would those concerns have been more acute than in Liverpool. And it is to Liverpool, or at least it is to the political editor of the Liverpool Echo, the multi-award-winning Liam Thorp, that we go next to find out, A, Liam, what's happened, and B, how this news is likely to be or has already been greeted by some of the key families and campaigners who've been waiting for years for, I hope, for precisely what they have received today.
Hi, James. Thanks very much for having me on. And you're not coming to me in Liverpool, because I've had the privilege of being in London today with the families, meeting with the Prime Minister in Downing Street. It was a highly emotional moment, as you can imagine, as the Prime Minister came out and greeted four of the leading family campaigners on the steps of Downing Street. And then we went inside and they spoke, at length about this bill. The families that I have spoken to are very relieved. Margaret Aspinall says this is a day to celebrate.
Yeah.
But there is, of course, always in the back of their mind, they've been let down so many times before. They've had to come back and face the knocks and face the obstacles. They all have in the back of their mind that this job is not done yet. This is not a law in practice. It's not achieved that royal assent yet. But the Prime Minister today, and it was really important, this said directly to the families, this bill will not be watered down as it goes through the parliamentary process. He's put that on the record with journalists. That is absolutely essential, because we know, you know as well as I do, that once things start to navigate their way through both houses of Parliament, things can change a little bit. But he and both the Justice Secretary and the Prime Minister have been absolutely adamant that this bill that we see now, and all that it brings with it, all these important changes to how this country works and operates on behalf of ordinary people, will be what comes into law when it gets through the process, and that's vital.
Did you and people like Margaret, and I think Charlotte Hennessy was there, who lost her dad, of course, and Margaret lost her son James, who was just 18 at the time. Did you all know when you got there what was going to happen, or was there still a little bit of tension about whether or not the Prime Minister was going to tell these people that what we wanted to hear?
No, we knew. And the families met yesterday with David Lammy, now in post as the Justice Secretary, and I have to say they were very impressed with the way he spoke about this bill, and the Victims Minister as well. They had a chance to see what it is. Most importantly, it has that legal duty of candour in it. That is so important with criminal sanctions. That, I'm sure
I was coming to that. Just talk us through exactly what that is, if you could, Liam.
I'm sure many of your listeners will be slightly confused by the fact that in this country we now need a law to make public officials tell the truth. But you look at the absolute array of scandals and injustices that we've seen, from the post office to the infected blood scandal. I know you've covered many of these on your show, to Grenfell, Manchester Arena bombing, and they all have a running theme here. And unfortunately, that is that the families and the ordinary people who've been just unlucky enough to be caught up in these terrible tragedies have faced lies, smears, obfuscation, gaslighting from the establishment. That is just a running theme. We've seen it time and time again. Hillsborough was obviously the big example, and then we've seen it continue in all these other cases. So a legal duty of candour means that there will be criminal sanctions for public officials who do not tell the truth, who do not act with honesty at things like inquiries, inquests. And that's massive, because it's a total reframing of how these people can act in these circumstances. The other really, really important aspect of the bill is a rebalancing of legal aid as well. So Margaret Aspinall has spoken many times about how she had to cash an insurance check after her son's death just to pay for legal representation at the first inquest. And that's such a stark image for everyone. Meanwhile, you know, all these public organisations have teams of very expensive lawyers. And to be fair to the Prime Minister, he said in his statement, you know, no longer will public authorities be able to hide behind these, you know, large crews of very expensive lawyers. Meanwhile, you know, ordinary people have to scrabble together their last pennies while they're deeply traumatised just to afford the basic legal representation. So that's like one of the biggest changes in legal aid that we've seen, I think, in a decade. And it's a fundamental difference to how people will be treated going forward.
So not over the line yet. You are right to remind us, but as far as everybody involved, and of course we're talking about people who lost loved ones and have waited an unconscionable amount of time, 97 families who have lost loved ones and have waited an unconscionable amount of time for what effectively is a reassurance that what has happened to them couldn't happen to anybody else.
I think that's the most important thing when I talk about the Hillsborough families. They unfortunately have lost their chance at real justice. No one has been held legally accountable for the absolute disaster that was caused, that took their family from their loved ones from them. They are doing this for other people. The Prime Minister said to them in that room today, you will have helped thousands of people who you will probably never meet in the future because of your efforts, your campaigning, and that's just an absolute testament to them. I hope they're all feeling extremely proud today.
That's very emotional, actually, the way you've described it. Goodness knows what the emotions were in the room, Liam.
It was highly charged, but there was always, you know, these are Scousers, so there was moments of levity as well. Margaret Aspinall said when suggested that she would stand up for the Prime Minister to come in, and she said, no, he can stand up for me.
Quite right. Quite right, too.
Quite right as well.
Yes,
quite right.
well, Scouse has just come into this room, and I always stand up when Sheila Fogarty arrives in the room. Liam, you'll understand why I'm asking you this question. Will it reach our profession? Because one of the most disgusting examples of so-called journalism in the history of these islands was undertaken in the immediate aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster by a man, happily many people listening to this will never have heard of, called Kelvin Mackenzie. Would that kind of activity fall under the remit of the new bill, the new law, or would it just be public servants and public workers?
It is just referring to public servants. I mean, you're right to raise that. You know, that is a pain still felt deeply in the city of Liverpool today, and that newspaper is, of course, still boycotted in the city of Liverpool today. And that all ties into the way that the establishment worked together to close ranks, to blame, you know, grieving families, to blame their loved ones for what happened in the most horrendous of circumstances. Imagine you going through that pain and that tragedy and then seeing the different organs of the establishment move together to create this false narrative that we now know to just be a pack of lies.
Yes.
So it is all part of that rebalancing. You know, the Hillsborough law will specifically refer to these public bodies and public authorities, but the hope is that it breaks down that culture that includes the media in terms of just the lies and the obfuscation that get told.
I think Margaret Thatcher's press secretary, Bernard Ingham, went to his grave still subscribing to these lies. So the ripples reach far beyond the
they
public.
do, and we still see today, you know, if you look on social media, you still see these families having to put up with outrageous slurs against their loved ones. And, you know, that's many years after a coroner sat in a coroner's court in Warrington and said these people were unlawfully killed, these fans were in no way culpable at all, which is what everybody close to them knew. And yet still, unfortunately, some of that stuff still pervades on social media, and the Hillsborough Justice Campaign have done great work in calling that stuff out as well.
But today is a good day. Today is a day for celebration and, I think, relief.
Margaret said that in Downing Street today, you know, that as people were still bringing up their worries and concerns, and she said, today we can allow ourselves to celebrate, and then tomorrow it's back to work, holding the government's feet to the fire, making sure that this is exactly what it's been promised to be.
Liam, thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you, particularly on a day like today. Liam Thorp, the political editor for the Liverpool Echo there, reflecting upon this remarkable moment for 97 families who have been to hell and back, arguably twice, Sheila. It's a big day for your city, this.
Yeah. And you know, you mentioned Sir Bernard Ingham, Norman Betterson.
The copper.
I mean, he repeated them within hours of the coroner's verdicts, a jury-led coroner's
But you
court.
would not be allowed to anymore,
no.
if I've understood this legislation correctly.
Yeah.
Your collar felt immediately.
And more importantly, if something dreadful were to happen again in a place such as that, where there should be safety in place, that onus, that legal onus to tell the truth and not to disappear videos and disappear documents and force police to change statements and the like, would put you in jail.
That is it for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Culture. And it was a bit of a cracker, actually, if you'd allow me to suggest that to you, immodestly. You can listen on Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions. You can put your news categories in the order you want. Pause, rewind live radio, listen to a range of podcasts. So do download the official LBC app. It's free, and it's at your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC. But now it's time for another cracker, because Sheila Fogarty's here.
Thank you very much indeed.
James O'Brien on LBC.